storm was loud enough to bury most sounds in Riverton that night, but Caleb Henderson still heard the motorcycle before it reached his shop.
The engine is screaming for help.
He heard the engine screaming through the rain, fighting for one more mile through Riverton's empty industrial streets.
Come on, just one more mile.
A violent metallic knock cut through the wind.
Not now!
And turned Malik's last mile into a fight for control. The bike slid into the flooded lot outside Henderson Motor Works, dragged sideways by rain, failing metal, and fading control. The rider fell hard near the old garage door, soaked to the bone and clutching his shoulder beside the ruined Harley.
Sir, can you make it run long enough to get me home?
Before Caleb understood why Malik was riding through the storm, he learned Malik had promised his daughter he would be at her graduation by morning.
My daughter is waiting for me.
Malik had no money, no backup plan, and no time left to lose. All he had was a father's promise waiting at the end of the road. Caleb opened the ruined Harley with the careful hands of a man who had spent his life listening to machines. Caleb listened to the broken engine for only a few seconds and felt 18 years of buried pain rise inside him.
I know that sound.
The failure was not ordinary wear. It carried the same deliberate pattern Caleb had feared for 18 years.
I've seen this before.
The sound inside Malik's Harley had already destroyed Caleb's life once, long before this storm brought it back to his door.
What did this bike do to you?
Because that sound had already destroyed his life once. For several seconds, neither man spoke as rain tapped steadily against the garage roof.
Don't touch a thing.
For several seconds, neither man spoke. Malik stood near the workbench, staring at the old title papers, as if the ink might rearrange itself into something easier to understand. Caleb remained beside the exposed engine, one hand resting against the cold metal of the Road King. The storm had begun to move beyond Riverton by then, but rain still tapped steadily against the roof, slipping through a crack near the back wall and falling into an empty oil pan with a slow, hollow rhythm. Malik had spent most of his adult life around motorcycles. He knew enough to recognize when a mechanic was concerned and when a mechanic was simply trying to sound important. But what he saw on Caleb's face was neither. It was grief mixed with recognition, the look of a man who had just found a piece of his own past hidden inside a stranger's machine. He asked Caleb what the name on the paperwork meant. The old mechanic did not answer immediately. He picked up the damaged cam component again and turned it beneath the fluorescent light. Its edges were worn down, but the seal was still there. Small, faint, nearly invisible unless someone knew where to look. Then Caleb told Malik that the rider listed on those documents had died in the accident that ruined him. Not the man who bought the bike years later. Not the rider who had owned it before Malik. The original rider. The man whose crash had been used to blame Caleb for a failure he had tried to prevent. Malik looked back at the Road King. Suddenly, the motorcycle no longer seemed like an unlucky purchase from a liquidation yard. It looked like evidence that had somehow survived 18 years of lies. Caleb explained that the official report had claimed the motorcycle had been destroyed after the crash. That detail had always bothered him, though he had never been able to prove why. The bike had been taken away before he could inspect it. The police had refused to let him near the evidence. Victor's lawyers had moved quickly, and every question Caleb asked had been treated as the bitter complaint of a man trying to escape responsibility. By the time Caleb understood how completely he had been trapped, the machine was gone. Or so he had believed. Malik asked the question that had been hanging in the garage since the moment Caleb saw the title. If the bike was supposed to be destroyed, how had it ended up in his hands? Caleb had no answer, but he knew one thing with certainty. Machines did not disappear on their own. Someone had moved that Harley. Someone had rebuilt it. Someone had removed parts, replaced evidence, erased records, and then sent it back into the world under a different history. And if the same kind of damaged component had caused the previous owner's highway crash, then Victor Hale's secret had not ended 18 years earlier. It had continued. That realization changed the repair. Until then, Caleb had been trying to save Malik's ride so a father could keep a promise to his daughter. But now every part that came off the engine mattered for another reason. The damaged chain, the worn guide, the altered tensioner, the hidden Hale seal. None of it could be thrown away. Caleb laid each piece on a clean cloth, carefully separating them from the normal debris of the repair. He took photographs with an old digital camera from a drawer beneath the counter. The camera was outdated, its screen scratched, but it still worked. He photographed the seals, the manufacturing numbers, the strange cuts in the metal, and the repair marks that had been hidden under layers of grease. Malik watched quietly for a while. Then he asked whether this could get Caleb into trouble. The old mechanic gave a tired half-smile. Trouble, he said, had been living with him for 18 years. He just had not known its name. That was the first time Malik saw something change in Caleb. Before that night, the older man had carried himself like someone trying not to take up space in the world. He moved carefully. He spoke softly. He avoided eye contact too long. But now, while studying the engine, Caleb's hands became steadier. His back straightened. The old instinct returned to him, the instinct of a mechanic who trusted what he knew, even when nobody else believed him. He began explaining the failure in a way Malik could understand. The chain tensioner had not simply worn down. It had been weakened by design. The materials were cheap, but the failure pattern was too consistent to be accidental. The part had been made to look almost identical to a reliable one, yet it lacked the strength required for long-distance riding. It would survive just long enough to pass inspection. It would survive long enough for a customer to drive away feeling satisfied. Then, under heat and pressure, it would begin to fail. A rider might hear a faint metallic tapping first, then a vibration. Then, if they ignored it or could not reach help in time, the engine could lock. Caleb's voice became quieter as he described the last part. An engine lock at highway speed could turn a motorcycle into a weapon against the person riding it. Malik looked down at the wet leather gloves in his hands. He had been less than an hour from that kind of disaster when he reached Henderson Motor Works. For the first time, he understood that Caleb had not just repaired his bike. The old man may have saved his life. But Caleb did not want gratitude. He seemed almost uncomfortable when Malik tried to thank him. Instead, he returned to the engine and kept working. Every few minutes, he would pause, listen, adjust something, and continue. There was no rush in his movements, yet there was urgency in everything he did. The clock above the office door passed 2 in the morning, then 3. By 4, the rain had weakened into a mist, and the distant thunder had faded beyond the warehouses at the edge of town. The city outside had gone quiet. Only the occasional sound of tires on wet pavement passed through the darkness. Inside the garage, Caleb installed the camshaft he had kept hidden for so many years. He did not make a ceremony of it. He did not tell Malik how much it had cost him to use it. He simply cleaned the part one final time, fitted it into place, and tightened each bolt with the kind of attention that comes from experience and regret. But Malik understood. He had seen the way Caleb held that camshaft before putting it into the engine. It was not like a mechanic holding a spare part. It was like a father holding the last object connected to a life he had failed to protect. Malik offered to pay for it. Caleb refused. Malik offered to sell the Road King once he reached Fairmont, to send the money back, to do whatever it took. Again, Caleb refused. Then, after a long silence, the old man told him something that did not sound like an order. It sounded more like a request from someone who had spent too many years alone. He asked Malik to come back after the graduation. No matter what happened, no matter how tired he was, no matter whether the day went well or badly. Just come back. Malik nodded. He had no idea why that promise mattered so much, but he knew it did. And after hearing what Caleb had lost, he could not bring himself to take the request lightly. A little before dawn, the Road King came back to life. The engine did not roar wildly. It settled into a deep, steady rhythm, low and strong, like a heartbeat returning after a long illness. Caleb listened with his head slightly tilted, eyes closed, letting the sound fill the garage. For a moment, Malik thought the old mechanic might cry, but Caleb only opened his eyes and gave a single nod. The bike was ready. Malik stood beside it in the gray light of early morning, looking down at the man who had worked through a storm for someone he had never met. He wanted to say something meaningful, something big enough to match what had been done for him. But there were moments when words feel too small. So he simply told Caleb that he would not forget. Caleb looked toward the old framed photograph in the office. Then he looked back at Malik. He told him that forgetting was easy. Keeping a promise was harder. Malik rode out of Riverton as the first thin line of sunlight touched the clouds. The streets were still wet. The warehouses were still dark. But the Road King moved smoothly beneath him, carrying him toward Fairmont, toward his daughter, toward the promise he had nearly lost. Caleb remained at the garage door long after the sound of the motorcycle disappeared. Then he turned back inside. The broken parts were still laid out on the cloth. The old title papers were still open on the workbench. The Hale seal sat beneath the yellow light like a small wound that had finally started bleeding again. Caleb picked up the burned spark plug he had kept from Isaiah's accident. For 18 years, he had treated it like proof of his failure. He had hidden it in a drawer, taken it out only when grief became too heavy, then put it away again before morning. But that day, he did not return it to the drawer. He placed it beside the damaged component from Malik's motorcycle. Old evidence beside new evidence. A dead son beside a living truth. By 8 o'clock, Riverton was awake. And by 9, Victor Hale was standing outside Henderson Motor Works with 2 investors, a polished black SUV, and the kind of smile that had fooled people for most of his life. Victor had aged well on the surface. His hair was silver now, but styled carefully. His jacket looked expensive. His watch caught the morning light. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the world had already decided he was important. Behind him, across the street, banners were being hung on a vacant lot. The banners displayed the logo of Hale Performance Customs and announced the opening of a new luxury performance center. It was bigger than Victor's original garage had ever been. Glass walls, chrome signage, a showroom for wealthy riders who wanted their machines to look dangerous without ever having to understand what was inside them. Caleb watched from the doorway as Victor approached. The investors stayed a few steps behind, pretending to admire the old shop while clearly seeing it as nothing more than a piece of land in the way. Victor greeted Caleb with the practiced warmth of a man who enjoyed being cruel only when no one could prove it. He spoke about progress, about opportunity, about how Riverton was changing. Then he handed Caleb a folder containing the final notice from the bank. 7 days. That was all Caleb had left before the property would be transferred. Victor acted as though he was doing him a favor by delivering the news personally. He suggested that perhaps it was time for Caleb to stop fighting old ghosts. He suggested that a man his age deserved peace. Caleb did not react. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked back to the workbench and picked up the damaged component from Malik's bike. Then he placed it on the counter between them. Victor's expression changed, only for a second. But Caleb saw it. The smile remained, yet something behind it slipped. His eyes moved to the Hale seal stamped into the metal. His fingers tightened around the folder. The smooth confidence in his face became strained, like a thin layer of paint cracking over rust. Victor recovered quickly. He said the seal meant nothing. He claimed parts changed hands all the time. He suggested Caleb was seeing conspiracies because he could not accept the past. But when Victor turned to leave, Caleb noticed something else. His hand was trembling. Not much, just enough. And for the first time in 18 years, Caleb Henderson understood that Victor Hale was afraid. Victor Hale left Henderson Motor Works with the same polished smile he had arrived with, but Caleb knew that smile had changed. It no longer belonged to a man who felt untouchable. It belonged to a man who had just seen a ghost rise from the floorboards of his own past. For the rest of that day, Caleb did not open the shop to customers. He locked the front door, pulled down the faded blinds, and spread every piece of evidence across the workbench. Malik's damaged parts sat beside the burned spark plug from Isaiah's accident. The title papers remained open near Caleb's camera. The old evidence seemed almost impossible to connect at first. One motorcycle from 18 years ago, one bike that should have been destroyed, one seal hidden inside a part no ordinary rider would ever inspect. But Caleb had spent his life listening to engines. He knew that machines told the truth slowly. They did not care who owned the building, who signed the checks, or who had the better lawyer. Metal remembered pressure. Bearings remembered heat. Chains remembered strain. And when something failed by design, the evidence often stayed buried inside the damage. By noon, Caleb had photographed every detail twice. He wrote down serial numbers. He matched worn patterns. He checked the old manuals he had kept in a cabinet near the back wall. Then he found something he had not expected. the part inside Malik's road. King carried a batch number that had been discontinued years earlier. It was from the same supplier Victor had used before the old accident. The same supplier Caleb had warned him about. The same supplier Victor had once claimed had never existed. For nearly 2 hours, Caleb sat alone in the office, staring at that number. He could still hear Isaiah's voice in his mind, not the voice from the night he died. Caleb had tried for years not to remember that night. What stayed with him was an earlier memory. Isaiah standing beside him at the old shop, grease on his hands, laughing at the way his father could recognize a bad engine by sound alone. Isaiah had once told him that engines were honest because they could not lie about pain. If something was wrong inside them, they would always make a noise eventually. Caleb had not understood then how much those words would haunt him. Now they felt like a warning. By late afternoon, Malik called. He had made it to Fairmont. For a moment, Caleb did not answer. He stared at the phone, still unsure whether the call would bring relief or more trouble. Then he picked up. Malik's voice was tired, but it carried something Caleb had not heard in years. Joy. He had arrived just before the ceremony began. He had walked into the school auditorium with rain still drying on his jacket and road dust on his boots. His daughter had been seated among the graduates, wearing the dress he had carried through the storm. When she saw him, she did not run to him. She did not make a scene. She simply looked over the crowd, found him standing near the back wall, and smiled in a way that made every mile worth it. Malik told Caleb that he had never felt so ashamed of how close he came to breaking that promise. Then he told him that his daughter had hugged him afterward and said she knew he would come. That was all Caleb needed to hear. For the first time in 18 years, he felt that maybe one promise had been saved from the same fate as all the others. But Malik had not forgotten what happened at the shop. He had spent part of the afternoon searching through the paperwork for his Road King. The more he looked, the stranger it became. The title history had gaps. The previous owner had purchased the bike through a dealer that no longer existed. The dealer's address turned out to belong to a storage company connected to Hale Performance Customs, and the insurance report from the old owner's death mentioned a mechanical failure but did not list the exact cause. That detail bothered Malik. He called one of the men from Road Saints MC, an older biker named Curtis Bell. Curtis had spent more than 20 years as a state traffic investigator before retirement. He knew how evidence disappeared when powerful people wanted it gone. He also knew how often old files were marked closed long before the truth was fully understood. Malik told him everything. At first, Curtis was cautious. He had seen too many people mistake grief for proof. But when Malik mentioned the Hale seal and the batch number, Curtis became quiet. Then he told Malik that he had heard rumors years ago about Hale Performance Customs. Rumors of cheap parts, suspicious accidents, customers pressured into silence, and repair records that never quite matched the machines on the road. Nothing had ever been proven. Not because there was no truth, because no one had managed to hold enough of it at once. Malik told Curtis he had found a man who might have been carrying part of that truth for 18 years. 3 days later, Malik returned to Riverton. He did not come alone. By then, Caleb had almost convinced himself that Malik would not return. He had spent the days preparing for the bank's deadline, sorting tools into boxes, deciding which machines he could sell, which photographs he could not bear to throw away, and which memories he would have to leave behind if Henderson Motor Works closed forever. He had also started to notice cars slowing near the shop. A black sedan passed twice one afternoon. A dark pickup sat across the street for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. No threats, no broken windows, no warning left on the door. But Caleb understood the message. Victor was watching. On the fourth morning after the storm, the sound of motorcycles rolled down the street. Not one bike, several. The sound was deep and steady, echoing through Riverton's old warehouse district. Caleb stepped outside and saw Malik leading a line of riders into the parking lot. Behind him were members of Road Saints MC, all of them dressed in worn leather and rain-faded denim. They did not arrive like men looking for trouble. They arrived like people who had already decided that someone had been left alone for too long. Curtis Bell was among them. He was tall, gray-haired, and walked with the stiff posture of a man whose old injuries had never fully healed. Beside him stood another biker Caleb recognized after a long moment. The man's name was Raymond Knox, a retired Harley mechanic who had once worked at a supplier near Hale's original garage. Raymond looked older than Caleb remembered. His face had deep lines, and his hands shook slightly as he removed his gloves. But his eyes were clear. He told Caleb he had been at Hale Performance Customs on the night of the accident. Caleb did not speak. Raymond explained that he had delivered a crate of parts that evening. He had seen Victor argue with Caleb near the service bay. He had heard Caleb warn him that the cam system was dangerous. He had heard Victor say the bike was leaving that night, no matter what Caleb thought. Then, after the crash, Raymond saw Victor pull paperwork from an office drawer before the police arrived. He watched him hand documents to a lawyer. He watched him tell everyone that Caleb had approved the work. Raymond had wanted to say something then, but Victor had threatened him. Not openly. Not in a way that could be reported. Victor had simply made it clear that Raymond's job, his reputation, and his family's security could disappear if he caused trouble. Raymond had been younger then. His wife was sick. His son had just started college. He convinced himself that someone else would speak up. No one did. For 18 years, he had carried that cowardice. When Malik told him about Caleb repairing the Road King through the storm, using his own last valuable part to help a stranger keep a promise to his daughter, Raymond said something inside him changed. He realized Caleb had spent 18 years paying for a sin that belonged to another man. And Raymond had spent 18 years helping that lie survive. Curtis placed a thick folder on Caleb's workbench. Inside were copies of old reports, insurance records, auction documents, and storage transfers. It took hours to piece together the full story, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. The motorcycle from the original accident had not been destroyed. It had been moved from the evidence yard under a false disposal order. A shell company had purchased it. The shell company was linked through a chain of ownership to Hale Performance Customs. The bike was rebuilt using replacement parts, then sold through another intermediary to avoid attention. Years later, it reappeared in the hands of the man whose name Malik had found on the title. That man died in a highway accident after his engine locked. The Road King was later sold again through an estate liquidation. And eventually, by chance or fate, it made its way to Malik. The machine had carried the same secret through several owners, leaving wreckage behind it like a trail no one had bothered to follow. Caleb sat down slowly. He had spent years believing the past was over because everyone else had moved on. But the truth was worse. Victor had not simply destroyed Caleb's life and walked away. He had taken the same dangerous system, the same dishonest parts, the same method of hiding evidence, and turned it into a business model. The old accident was not one tragedy. It was the first warning. Curtis told Caleb they needed independent engineers. They needed the damaged parts examined by people with no connection to Hale. They needed the old case reopened. They needed journalists willing to listen. And they needed to move before Victor had time to erase anything else. Caleb listened, but fear still lived inside him. He had been here before. He had brought concerns to people in authority. He had trusted that facts would matter. He had watched Victor walk away while his own name was dragged through the mud. Malik understood that fear, so he did not pressure Caleb. He simply told him that some men spend their whole lives waiting for the right moment to become brave, only to learn that bravery usually begins when someone else is already in danger. That sentence stayed with Caleb. The next morning, Victor Hale announced the grand opening of his newest performance center. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, directly across from Henderson Motor Works. The timing was not accidental. Victor wanted cameras, investors, local officials, and reporters to see his polished new showroom, while Caleb's fading garage stood behind it like a symbol of failure. He wanted Riverton to believe that the future belonged to him, and that men like Caleb were nothing more than rusted pieces of the past. The invitation described Hale Performance Customs as a company built on safety, craftsmanship, and loyalty. When Caleb read those words, he almost laughed. Instead, he folded the paper and placed it beside Isaiah's burned spark plug. By Saturday, the street outside Henderson Motor Works looked nothing like it had during the storm. The skies were clear. The sidewalks had been washed clean. White tents stood outside Victor's new building. Caterers moved between tables. Large banners carried the Hale logo. Investors in tailored jackets gathered near the entrance, speaking about growth, property values, and expansion. Victor stood near the stage in front of the showroom doors, smiling for photographs. For years, he had mastered the art of looking like a man who had earned everything. Across the street, Caleb's old sign hung crooked above the garage. Henderson Motor Works. The letters were faded. The roof still leaked. The windows still needed paint. But that morning, the shop was not empty. Inside, Curtis reviewed the evidence one final time. Raymond sat near the office door, pale but determined. Malik stood beside the Road King, now fully repaired. His daughter's graduation flower still tucked into a side compartment. Several members of Road Saints MC waited outside, engines quiet, helmets in hand. Caleb stood near the workbench. In front of him was a small metal box. Inside were the damaged Hale parts, the old spark plug, photographs, records, and copies of every document that could prove what Victor had done. His hands were trembling, not because he doubted the evidence, because he knew that once he stepped outside, there would be no going back. For 18 years, Victor Hale had controlled the story. He had told Riverton who Caleb was. He had told the police what happened. He had told the newspapers who was responsible. And Caleb had lived inside that lie because he had no power to break it. But now, standing in the quiet shop with Malik, Curtis, Raymond, and the Road Saints behind him, Caleb realized something he had forgotten. Truth did not need to be loud to be strong. It only needed enough people willing to stop looking away. At noon, Victor stepped onto the stage. He began with the same speech he had given at other openings. He spoke about American craftsmanship. He praised the spirit of the open road. He thanked the investors who believed in his vision. He spoke about trust, safety, and the brotherhood of riders. Then the sound of motorcycles filled the street. One by one, the Road Saints rode into view. More than 30 Harleys moved down the block in a slow line, their engines low and controlled. They did not rev aggressively. They did not block traffic recklessly. They did not shout. They simply arrived. The crowd turned. Victor's smile stiffened. Malik led the group on the blue-black Road King that Caleb had repaired in the storm. He parked directly across from the stage. Behind him, the other riders formed a straight row along the curb. Then Caleb stepped out of Henderson Motor Works. He wore the same faded work shirt he had worn for years. His hands were still stained with oil. His shoulders were slightly bent with age. But he did not look small. He carried the metal box under one arm. Curtis walked beside him holding the records. Raymond followed behind, moving slowly but refusing to stop. The local reporter who had come to cover Victor's opening recognized Caleb almost immediately. She remembered the old accident. She remembered the headlines from 18 years ago. She also remembered that Caleb had disappeared from public life after Isaiah died. When she asked what was happening, Curtis handed her a copy of the evidence summary. The mood changed quickly. Victor tried to interrupt. He told everyone that Caleb was confused. He suggested that the old mechanic was bitter and unstable. He said the Road Saints were trying to sabotage a legitimate business. But his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Too many people were watching. And this time, Caleb was not alone. Curtis explained the chain of evidence, the false disposal order, the shell company, the rebuilt motorcycle, the repeat failure pattern, the supplier records, the mismatched parts, the mechanics analysis, the old accident report that never mentioned the batch number. Raymond then spoke. His voice shook at first, but it grew steadier with every sentence. He told the crowd that Caleb had warned Victor. He confirmed that Victor had pushed the unsafe bike out of the shop. He described the paperwork being changed before investigators arrived. He admitted that he had stayed silent because he was afraid. He said he had been ashamed of that silence every day since. The crowd did not move. Victor looked toward the investors, hoping they would dismiss it all as drama. But they had stopped smiling. One of them was already on the phone. Another stared at the Hale banner above the showroom entrance, as if it had become something ugly. Then Caleb opened the metal box. He removed the burned spark plug. For a moment, the entire street seemed to grow quieter. Caleb told them it came from the motorcycle involved in the crash 18 years earlier. He explained that he had kept it because he believed it represented his failure. But after studying Malik's Road King, he understood that the machine had been failing long before Isaiah died. He held up the damaged Hale component. Then he looked directly at Victor. Caleb did not scream. He did not curse. He did not beg anyone to believe him. He simply told Victor that he had taken his name, his work, and his son. But he had never understood the machines he sold. That was the moment Victor finally lost control. He accused Caleb of lying. He called Raymond a coward and Curtis a washed-up investigator. He claimed Malik had planted evidence. He insisted that the old accident had been closed for years and that no one could reopen it. But panic made him careless. The reporter asked why he knew the old case had been listed as destroyed if he had never seen the disposal order. Victor froze. It was only a brief pause, but it was enough. Curtis had already contacted the State Fraud Division. The reporter had already sent copies of the documents to her editor. Independent engineers had reviewed Caleb's photographs and confirmed that the part failures were consistent with deliberate use of substandard materials. Within an hour, law enforcement officers arrived. They did not arrest Victor immediately in front of everyone. First, they secured the damaged motorcycle parts. They collected the records. They questioned Raymond. They requested access to Hale Performance Customs files, supplier contracts, repair logs, and storage records. But Victor understood what was happening. The story he had buried for 18 years was no longer buried. By evening, the grand opening had been canceled. The investors withdrew. The showroom doors remained closed. And the Hale banners, once meant to celebrate Victor's success, hung over an empty parking lot like reminders of a lie too large to hide. The investigation lasted months. During that time, more writers came forward. A widow from another county brought records from her husband's crash. A former employee described being told to replace expensive parts with cheaper ones. A supplier admitted that Hale had purchased batches of components that failed safety standards, but cost almost half as much. The evidence grew. So did the truth. Victor Hale was eventually charged with fraud, evidence tampering, falsifying repair records, and reckless endangerment connected to multiple motorcycle failures. Civil lawsuits followed. His business collapsed. The same reputation he had built by stealing Caleb's work became the thing that destroyed him. And the most painful part for Victor was that he could not blame anyone else. Every false signature, every altered record, every unsafe part, every rider placed at risk. All of it led back to him. Meanwhile, Riverton began to see Caleb differently. At first, people came to Henderson Motor Works out of curiosity. They wanted to see the mechanic from the news. They wanted to ask questions about the old case. Some came with apologies they should have offered years earlier. Caleb accepted some. Others he could not. Forgiveness, he learned, was not the same as pretending nothing happened. What mattered most was that Isaiah's name was cleared. The revised investigation confirmed that Isaiah had not caused the tragedy. He had tried to save others when the fire broke out. The city recognized him for his courage. A small memorial was placed near the site of the old accident, not as a monument to loss, but as proof that he had been brave when others were afraid. Caleb attended the dedication quietly. He did not give a speech. He stood beneath Isaiah's name and placed the burned spark plug at the base of the memorial for a few seconds before taking it back. This time, he did not see it as evidence of failure. He saw it as the beginning of the truth. Road Saints, MC, started a fundraiser to help Caleb keep his shop. He resisted at first. He did not want charity. He had spent too long believing that accepting help meant admitting weakness. But Malik reminded him that loyalty was not charity. Loyalty meant showing up when someone had spent years showing up for others. The money was enough to pay the bank, repair the roof, replace the failing electrical system, and repaint the front of Henderson Motor Works. Caleb refused to turn the place into something fancy. He did not want glass walls or polished chrome floors. He wanted the shop to remain what it had always been, a place where honest work mattered more than appearances. A few weeks later, a new sign went up above the garage. Henderson Motor Works, built with truth, kept alive by loyalty. Malik came by every weekend after that. Sometimes he needed a repair. Sometimes he did not. Sometimes he simply sat on an old stool near the workbench while Caleb worked and talked about his daughter's new plans after graduation. She visited once too. She brought Caleb a framed photograph from the ceremony. In it, Malik stood in the back of the auditorium, soaked jacket, tired eyes, and a smile so wide it looked almost painful. She told Caleb that her father had made a promise and kept it. Caleb looked at the picture for a long time. Then he told her that promises were not always about being perfect. Sometimes they were about refusing to stop trying, even when the road was dark, the weather was cruel, and every reason to turn back was waiting behind you. Years earlier, Caleb had lost his son, because he believed work had to come before everything else. That night in the storm, he chose differently. He chose to save a stranger's promise. And in doing so, he found the truth that finally brought his own son home. Because sometimes, the person who arrives at your door needing help is not there by accident. Sometimes they carry the missing piece of a story you thought was over. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the force that pulls years of darkness into the light. And sometimes, justice does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the sound of an old engine finally running the way it was always meant to run. If you believe that truth may take time, but it never stops searching for a way back, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. The woman in the faded raincoat counted her coins twice before placing them on the marble counter.
Are you sure you can afford anything in here?
To the two cashiers behind the counter, she looked like a problem that had walked in wearing cheap clothes.
She looks like she came in from the alley.
They made her wait, served customers who came after her, and gave her the oldest croissant in the display case. Eleanor took the paper bag without complaint and sat at the small table near the trash station.
Some people don't understand where they belong.
As she bit into the dry croissant, the company's slogan did not feel like a promise anymore.
So this is what warmth became.
Then she heard the cashiers talking.
Careless because they believed no one important was listening. People like that ruin the whole atmosphere.
They spoke of certain customers as if they were stains on the atmosphere.
We should put her on the list before she comes back.
They had created a quiet system for making certain customers feel unwelcome enough to stop returning.
The wrong people need a little push out the door.
Older man entered wearing a navy cap and holding a small wallet in both hands.
Not him again.
He counted coins, carefully apologizing with his posture before anyone even asked him to.
This is a bakery, not a coin machine.
And that was the moment the woman in the raincoat stopped chewing, because the people behind the counter had no idea who she really was. The woman in the faded raincoat counted her coins twice before placing them on the marble counter. Her sleeves were damp from the morning rain, her shoes were scuffed at the toes, and the paper grocery bag hanging from her wrist had a small tear near the bottom. To anyone kind, she might have looked tired. To anyone careful, she might have looked like someone who had been carrying more than groceries. But to the two cashiers behind the counter, she looked like a problem that had walked in wearing cheap clothes. They did not know her name. They did not know that the polished bakery around them, from the golden logo on the glass door to the elegant slogan painted across the wall, existed because of her. They did not know that the woman quietly asking for one plain croissant was Eleanor Vale, founder and chief executive of Hearth and Hollow Bakery, a 58-store chain built on the promise that no one should ever be made to feel too poor, too tired, or too ordinary to deserve warmth. They only saw what they wanted to see. A woman who would not tip well. A woman who would not photograph her coffee for social media. A woman who did not belong in the bright little world they believed the flagship store was supposed to represent. So they made her wait. They served 3 customers who came after her. They reminded her of the price before she had even finished ordering. And when she finally placed her coins on the counter, they gave her the oldest croissant in the display case, the one that should have been pulled from sale before sunrise. Eleanor took the paper bag without complaint and sat at the small table near the trash station. It was the table people chose only when every other seat was full, the one beneath the cold draft from the side door. Across the room, painted in cream-colored letters, above a row of polished wooden booths, were the words that had made Hearth and Hollow famous. Warmth belongs to everyone. Those words appeared on every cup, every napkin, every training video, every investor presentation. Customers took photographs beneath them. Managers repeated them at orientation. The marketing team had built entire campaigns around them. But that morning, as Eleanor bit into a dry, stale croissant in the corner of her own flagship bakery, the words did not feel like a promise. They felt like a witness. Then she heard the cashiers talking. At first, it was the usual careless cruelty people use when they think no one important is listening. They laughed about the old man who paid in coins. They mocked delivery riders who asked for water. They complained about nurses coming in after night shifts with tired faces and cheap shoes. They spoke of certain customers as if they were stains on the atmosphere, people who made the bakery look less refined, simply by sitting down. Then one of them mentioned a list. Not a company list, not an official policy. Something they had created themselves, a quiet system for making certain customers feel so unwelcome that they would stop returning. They called it the Velvet List because in their minds, Hearth and Hollow was supposed to feel soft, beautiful, and expensive, and some people, they believed, were not fit to touch velvet. Eleanor did not move. She kept her head lowered beneath the brim of her gray cap and held the croissant like any tired customer trying to disappear into the corner. But every sense in her body had sharpened. Years in boardrooms had taught her how to sit still while people revealed more than they meant to. She had heard lies dressed as strategy, cruelty dressed as standards, and theft dressed as efficiency. But what she heard next made her freeze. One of the cashiers said the night baker needed to be gone before Monday, because if Maya Reyes kept talking, the whole Sunrise Honey Bun story could fall apart. Maya Reyes. The name had appeared once in a report on Eleanor's desk, buried beneath phrases that had made the issue sound small. A difficult employee, a misunderstanding about credit, a resolved workplace conflict. At the time, Eleanor had almost trusted the summary. Almost. But now, sitting in disguise at a table no one respected, she understood something cold and simple. The reports reaching her office had not been telling the truth. They had been covering it. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to understand what Hearth and Hollow was before it became a brand. Before the 58 stores, before the soft lighting and seasonal pastries, before investors called it a premium community bakery concept. It began with a little girl and her mother standing outside a bakery window on a winter morning, looking at warm bread they could barely afford. Eleanor had been 8 years old then. Her mother had saved coins for 2 days to buy one sweet roll for her birthday. They were poor, but her mother wanted her to have 1 hour that felt special. They entered the bakery with wet shoes and shy smiles. The man behind the counter served them because their money was real enough to take, but he made it clear that they could not sit near the window. He placed them at the little table near the restroom, beside the mop bucket and the draft from the back door. Eleanor remembered the shame more than the taste of the pastry. She remembered her mother pretending not to care. She remembered other customers looking away. Most of all, she remembered realizing that a room could be warm for some people and cold for others, depending on who was allowed to feel welcome. Years later, when she opened the first Hearth and Hollow, she painted her promise on the wall before she even ordered the menu board. Warmth belongs to everyone. It was not branding then. It was not a slogan. It was a vow made to the child she had been, and to the mother who had swallowed humiliation so her daughter could have one birthday pastry. The first store was small and imperfect. The chairs did not match. The counter had scratches. The original tip jar was an old blue ceramic jar painted with a little lighthouse. Eleanor baked before sunrise, served coffee at noon, washed dishes after closing, and learned the names of customers most businesses would have overlooked. A retired bus driver, a mail carrier, a young nurse, a man who sometimes slept in his car, but still insisted on paying for black coffee. Eleanor learned early that a bakery could feed more than hunger. It could tell a person they were still welcome in the world. Then the little store became 3 stores, then 11, then 30, then 58. The logo became cleaner. The chairs matched. The menu became seasonal. The old wooden counter was replaced by stone. The first location was renovated into the company's flagship store, polished until it looked less like a neighborhood bakery and more like a photograph of one. From headquarters, everything looked beautiful. Revenue was up. Customer traffic was strong. The flagship store had become the crown jewel of the company. Social media showed golden pastries, smiling employees, and sunlight falling perfectly over cups of coffee. The regional manager, Victor Harlan, reported that the store was thriving. Victor was calm, polished, and precise, the kind of man who could make any problem sound like a minor adjustment already handled. So when Eleanor first saw the negative reviews and anonymous employee complaints, Victor dismissed them gently. He said growth always made some people uncomfortable. He said high standards could feel unfair to employees who resisted accountability. He said one night, Baker, Maya Reyes, had been especially emotional about ordinary product development decisions. He said the situation had been resolved through coaching. The phrase should have comforted Eleanor. Instead, it stayed with her. A few days later, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a torn strip of apron cloth dusted with flour, a photocopy of a strange tip distribution sheet, and a scrap of parchment paper with one sentence written in blue ink. Ask who really bakes the sunrise buns. At the bottom was a tiny drawing of a lighthouse. Eleanor stared at that drawing longer than she expected to. It reminded her of the old blue tip jar from the first store, the one that had disappeared during renovation. Something about the envelope felt less like a complaint and more like a final attempt from someone who no longer trusted the official channels. So Eleanor stopped asking for reports. She went to see the truth herself. She bought the faded raincoat from a thrift store 2 neighborhoods away. She wore old shoes, a gray cap, and a delivery tote. She made herself look like someone the world was used to overlooking. Then, just after sunrise, she walked through the glass doors of her own flagship bakery as a stranger. The first thing she noticed was not open cruelty. It was performance. That made it worse. When a well-dressed couple entered ahead of her, Brielle Voss greeted them with a brightness so polished it seemed to sparkle. Brielle was the lead cashier, the face of the morning counter, beautiful in a sharp, curated way, with perfect hair and a smile that turned on instantly for the right kind of customer. Beside her, Kendra Pike laughed softly, offered samples, and made sure the couple knew about the limited edition glaze that had been trending online. Their warmth appeared instantly, like lights switched on for an audience. Then Eleanor stepped forward, and the lights went out. Brielle's eyes moved over the raincoat, the worn tote, the coins in Eleanor's hand. Something in her face hardened just enough for a person who had once been poor to recognize. Kendra became suddenly busy, wiping an already clean counter. The silence lasted just long enough to make Eleanor feel that asking for service was an inconvenience. That was how cruelty survived in places like this. Not always through shouting, not always through insults that could be quoted in a complaint. Sometimes it survived in pauses, glances, slow service, the wrong pastry, the cold seat near the trash, The tiny message that said a person could buy something but still not belong. Eleanor stayed after receiving her croissant. She listened, she watched, and the longer she stayed, the uglier the pattern became. An older man entered wearing a navy cap and holding a small wallet in both hands. His name was Samuel Brooks, though Eleanor did not know it yet. He ordered 1 sunrise honey bun and a small coffee. He counted coins carefully, apologizing with his posture even before anyone asked him to. Brielle's smile thinned. Kendra muttered that some people treated the register like a coin machine. The words were quiet enough to deny, but clear enough to wound. Samuel pretended not to hear. He looked once toward the table by the window, where morning light rested across the wood, then chose a seat closer to the back. Later, Eleanor would learn that Samuel had come to that same store every Friday morning with his wife, June, for 13 years. They had shared 1 honey bun and 2 coffees at the window table through retirement, illness, and the quiet narrowing of life. After June died, Samuel kept coming alone, not because the bun was just a pastry, but because grief sometimes survives by repeating small acts of love. Brielle and Kendra did not know that, or worse, they did not care. To them, Samuel was simply another low-value customer, another name for the velvet list. Eleanor watched 2 nurses in wrinkled scrubs get told the restroom was for paying customers, even though they had already ordered. She watched a delivery rider wait, while customers who came after him were served first. She watched a construction worker quietly move away from the front seating area after Kendra made a comment about muddy boots, even though the floor was clean. None of these moments was dramatic enough to make the evening news, but together they formed a culture, a polished room where kindness flowed upward and contempt flowed down. Then the cashier spoke of Maya. Maya Reyes, they said, had become a problem. She kept asking about missing tips. She kept claiming ownership over recipes created on company time. She had become protective of a notebook. Victor had promised to handle her before Monday's national launch. Once Maya was gone, no one would be able to prove where the sunrise honey buns had really come from. Eleanor left without revealing herself. She did not confront Brielle. She did not comfort Samuel in the moment. She did not call Victor from the sidewalk. Powerful people who are warned too early start cleaning before the truth can be preserved. Instead, Eleanor walked 3 blocks in the rain, sat on a bench outside a closed florist, and called Miriam Chen, the company's head of internal audit. Miriam was not dramatic, not easily impressed, and not interested in protecting anyone's comfort from the facts. By the next morning, Eleanor Vale had become Edith Lane, a temporary support worker assigned to the flagship store. Victor approved the staffing request without concern. People like Edith Lane were invisible by design, useful hands, not dangerous eyes. Eleanor returned before dawn, when the bakery had not yet put on its performance. The front lights were dim. The music had not started. The pastry case was still empty. Without customers and curated warmth, the store revealed its bones, racks of trays, flour on the floor, taped labels, tired appliances, and the steady rhythm of people working before anyone was awake enough to thank them. That was where Eleanor truly met Maya Reyes. Maya was not what Victor's report had described. She was not unstable. She was not difficult. She was a woman in her 30s with dark hair tied back, flour on her forearms, and the focused calm of someone who had learned to keep moving because stopping would allow exhaustion to catch her. She worked with quiet attention, not only to the dough, but to the people around her. When Edith struggled with the labeling system, Maya helped her without making her feel foolish. She explained allergy tags, freezer notes, tray timing, and which boxes split if stacked too high. She also placed a warmer pair of gloves near Edith's station, pretending they had simply been left there. That small kindness almost hurt more than the insults had. Cruelty confirmed what Eleanor feared. Kindness showed her what was being wasted. Over the next hours, Eleanor watched Maya hold the store together from the shadows. Maya adjusted oven temperatures before a batch could burn. She corrected an inventory mistake that would have left the store short by Friday. She softened a citrus glaze that had been mixed too sharply. She prepared a low-sugar honey bun and set it aside with Samuel's name written neatly on the bag. She remembered that one nurse preferred oat milk, but no vanilla. She saved broken pastry ends for the delivery rider, who came in cold after the morning route. None of it showed on a dashboard. None of it appeared in Victor's reports. But without Maya, the flagship store would have been nothing more than expensive lighting around an empty heart. When Brielle and Kendra arrived for the day shift, the room changed. Brielle swept in wearing perfume and confidence, already complaining about flour near the proofing station. Kendra followed with coffee from another shop, which Eleanor noticed immediately because employees were supposed to drink Hearth and Hollow products while on shift. They walked through the bakery as if morning began when they entered, as if the trays, the notes, the warm buns, and the prepared counter had somehow created themselves. Maya handed over the production notes. Brielle barely looked at them. Kendra asked whether the honey buns were finally consistent, a question designed to sound professional while reminding everyone that Maya's work was always on trial. Maya explained that humidity had affected the dough and that she had adjusted the rest time. Later that morning, Eleanor heard Brielle repeat the same detail to Victor over the phone, as if it had been her own observation. Eleanor said nothing, but she remembered. As Edith, she worked several shifts over the next few days. She wiped tables, unpacked deliveries, sorted sleeves, and listened. She learned that the official tip policy and the real tip practice were not the same. On paper, tips were shared among eligible hourly employees based on hours worked. In practice, Brielle and Kendra controlled a second calculation. They called it front weighting. They claimed that the people who shaped the guest experience deserved more. By that, they meant themselves. Night bakers, dish staff, prep workers, and cleaners received whatever remained after the front counter took its invisible cut. Sometimes the theft was cash removed before counting. Sometimes it was digital tips assigned under the wrong shift category. Sometimes it was a handwritten adjustment justified by customer-facing performance. The amounts were small enough to hide in daily noise, but over 14 months, small theft had become real money. For Brielle and Kendra, it meant extra spending money. For the workers they stole from, it meant delayed bills, cheaper groceries, and bus fare counted twice. Maya had noticed. She had filed complaints, but every complaint disappeared into Victor's office and came back labeled as resolved through coaching. The family connection came from a careless sentence. One evening, Kendra complained that Victor always protected Brielle because of family dinners. Brielle snapped at her to be careful where she said things, then reminded her that Victor was not technically her father. The word technically did not erase the truth. Miriam confirmed it the next day. Victor Harlan was married to Brielle's mother. He had supervised Brielle's promotions, closed complaints against her, and never disclosed the conflict of interest. Now the pattern was clear. Brielle was not simply arrogant. She was protected. Kendra was not simply cruel. She was useful to someone protected. And Victor was not simply negligent. He had built a locked gate around the truth. Still, the most important evidence was the notebook. Maya kept it wrapped in parchment and hidden inside an old flour tin in the storage room. Eleanor first saw it when Kendra nearly found it during a closing shift. Papers slid across the floor, and Eleanor helped gather them before anyone else could look too closely. She saw dates, sketches, ingredient ratios, customer notes, and small drawings of lighthouses in the margins. She saw early versions of the sunrise honey buns, notes about clover honey, oven temperature, texture, and how the glaze should catch the light without becoming sticky. She saw a sentence written beside one recipe. "Make it taste like morning is forgiving you." That sentence stayed with her. Miriam pulled Victor's national launch presentation that night. In it, Victor described the sunrise honey bun as a signature expression of morning comfort, designed to make morning feel forgiving. The wording was too close to be coincidence, and the dates were worse. Maya's drafts came months before Victor's proposal. He had not stolen only a recipe. He had stolen the language of her heart. The launch was scheduled for Monday. Victor arrived at the flagship on Friday afternoon, wearing a navy coat, polished shoes, and the calm expression of a man visiting property rather than people. The staff changed around him. Brielle became brighter. Kendra became useful. The shift lid stood straighter. Even the store seemed to perform for him. Eleanor kept her head down and wiped tables. Victor praised the pastry case. He complimented Brielle on presentation. He talked about excellence, consistency, and protecting the Hearth and Hollow experience. Every phrase sounded reasonable until Eleanor looked at Maya standing near the back kitchen, listening to her own work being celebrated without her name. Then Victor turned to Maya. His voice stayed smooth, but the room understood smoothness could bruise. He mentioned concerns about attitude. He mentioned intellectual property boundaries. He mentioned the seriousness of keeping company product materials within approved systems. Maya tried to explain, but his authority silenced her before his words did. Brielle watched with satisfaction. Kendra looked relieved. The other employees looked down, not because they believed Victor, but because people who live paycheck to paycheck know the cost of eye contact. Victor announced that Maya would be placed on final review through the weekend. Her access to product development materials would be restricted. Her participation in Monday's launch preparation would be suspended. The official reason would be process compliance. The real reason stood naked in the room. They were taking her work, then punishing her for remembering it was hers. Maya did not cry. That seemed to irritate Brielle more than tears would have. Maya only asked whether she was still expected to complete the night bake before the review began. Even while being humiliated, she thought of the customers who would come in the morning. She thought of the people who had done nothing to her and still deserved something warm. That was when Eleanor understood something important. Maya was not just a talented employee. She was the keeper of the original promise. She was what Hearth and Hollow had been before it became polished enough for people like Victor to exploit. But knowing the truth was not enough. Eleanor needed proof strong enough to survive denials, lawyers, edited memories, and the polished outrage of guilty people caught too late. So she waited. She let Victor believe Monday would belong to him. She let Brielle believe Maya's ending had already been written. She let Kendra keep her little notebook beneath the register. And behind the scenes, Miriam's team gathered everything. They pulled digital tip records and compared them with cash deposits. They found adjustments clustered around Brielle's shifts. They found camera outages during tip counts. They recovered deleted scheduling messages. They traced 6 complaints from Maya, all closed by Victor's office. 1 complaint mentioned tip theft. 1 mentioned customer discrimination. 1 mentioned the velvet list. 1 mentioned that Victor had used Maya's recipe language in a regional report. The final complaint contained almost the same sentence as the anonymous envelope. Ask who really bakes the sunrise buns. All 6 had been buried. Saturday brought the incident that removed any last hesitation. The bakery was busy, the kind of bright morning that made the store look like a commercial. Brielle and Kendra were in full performance for the customers they liked, offering samples and smiling beneath the slogan. Maya worked in the back, officially restricted from product development, but still responsible for keeping the pastry case full, because hypocrisy often depends on the labor of the people it punishes. Samuel came in later than usual, holding his navy cap and a folded photograph in his coat pocket. Eleanor later learned that it was his wedding anniversary. He had spent the morning at the cemetery visiting June. For 13 years, they had marked the day with a honey bun at the window table. He ordered 1 sunrise honey bun and a small coffee. His coins spilled slightly on the counter. Not many, just enough to slow him down. Kendra sighed. Brielle glanced toward the line behind him and suggested with cruel politeness that some customers might be more comfortable taking their orders to go when seating was limited. The window table was empty. Samuel looked at it, then looked down. Then Brielle did something Eleanor would never forget. She took a honey bun from the display, placed it in a bag, then switched it with 1 from a tray marked for disposal beneath the counter. The movement was quick. Most customers would not have seen it. Eleanor saw it. So did Maya. The bun was not unsafe. It was simply old, flattened, and unworthy of the price he paid. A small theft of dignity wrapped in branded paper. Maya crossed from the kitchen before caution could stop her. She did not accuse Brielle. She did not create a scene. She simply took a fresh bun from the warm tray, placed it in a new bag, and made sure Samuel received that one instead. For 1 brief second, the bakery became what it was supposed to be. Samuel held the warm bag in both hands. His eyes filled quietly, not with drama, but with the surprise of a person who had braced for humiliation and received gentleness instead. He sat at the window table and placed the worn photograph beside his coffee. In it, a younger Samuel and June smiled over a shared pastry. Maya returned to the back. Brielle's face hardened. The punishment came after the rush. Victor arrived within an hour, which told Eleanor he had been waiting for an excuse. The staff gathered near the back counter. Victor framed the issue as insubordination. He said Maya had interfered with front-of-house service, undermined chain of command, and created confusion during peak volume. Brielle added her version with practiced sadness. Kendra supported every word. Maya stood alone. That was the part Eleanor would remember. Not Victor's lies, not Brielle's cruelty, not Kendra's eagerness. It was the silence of the others. The baker who knew Maya had saved entire shifts. The dishwasher who knew tips had gone missing. The junior cashier who had once cried in the freezer after Brielle mocked her accent. They all knew pieces of the truth, but fear held them still. Eleanor did not judge them easily. She had been poor enough to understand fear. But she also knew that silence is the soil where people like Victor grow strong. Victor told Maya that her employment would be reviewed Monday morning before the launch meeting. Until then, she was to surrender any personal notes related to bakery products, because company policy required product development materials to remain accessible to management. Maya's face changed for the first time. Not panic exactly, but a flash of terror. The notebook, her recipes, her proof. Everything they had taken from her had at least left fingerprints inside those pages. If Victor got the notebook, the last living record of the truth could disappear. Eleanor created a small distraction by knocking over a stack of empty pastry sleeves near the storage door. It was clumsy enough to be believable from an older temp worker. Kendra snapped at her. Brielle rolled her eyes. Victor looked annoyed. For 30 seconds, the room's focus shifted. That was all Maya needed. She slipped into the storage room and came out moments later, with her expression too controlled and her apron pocket slightly heavier. As she passed Edith, her hand brushed Eleanor's sleeve, and something small moved from one pocket to another. Later, in the restroom, Eleanor unfolded the scrap Maya had given her. It was not the whole notebook. It was a single torn page, the first draft of the sunrise honey bun recipe, dated 11 months before Victor's proposal. At the bottom was the lighthouse. Beneath it was one sentence in blue ink. For the people who come in before the world has been kind to them. Eleanor stood in the restroom of her own flagship store, holding proof that the company's most celebrated new product had been born from the heart of a woman they were preparing to erase. By Sunday night, the trap was ready. Not a cruel trap. Eleanor did not believe cruelty could repair cruelty. She believed in truth arranged so carefully that lies had nowhere left to stand. Miriam had the audit files. Legal had the employment records. Human Resources had been instructed to attend Monday's launch meeting without informing Victor why. The board's ethics chair had been quietly briefed. Camera footage had been preserved from cloud backups Brielle thought had failed. The digital tip logs had been matched against deposits. Deleted scheduling messages had been recovered. The anonymous envelope, Maya's torn recipe page, and Victor's presentation were placed in one folder. Still, Eleanor needed one more thing. Maya's notebook had to be protected before Victor could take it. She found Maya after closing, sitting alone on an overturned crate near the dry storage shelves. The ovens had cooled. The bakery lights were low. Without music, customers, or performance, the room felt almost like the first Hearth and Hollow again, back when warmth came from work instead of design. Maya looked exhausted in a way sleep would not fix. Eleanor sat nearby, still wearing Edith's raincoat. For a while, neither of them spoke. Sometimes trust cannot be rushed with questions. Sometimes the most honest thing one person can give another is enough silence to decide whether the truth is safe. Maya eventually explained that she wrote everything down because memory was easy for powerful people to challenge. She wrote down dates because managers changed stories. She sketched lighthouses beside recipes that felt important because her daughter liked lighthouses. Maya had once told her daughter that a lighthouse was proof that even in darkness, someone could choose to keep a light burning for people they might never meet. That was why she had painted one on the tip jar. The tip jar had been her small attempt to make the team feel shared. Back when she still believed shared effort meant shared reward, she brought in an old blue ceramic jar and painted a lighthouse on it after her daughter went to bed. Across the front, she wrote, "For everyone who keeps the light on." For a few weeks, people smiled at it. Then Brielle taped a note over Maya's words, limiting tips to day staff only. No manager removed it. No one wanted conflict. Over time, the paper yellowed at the edges, and unfairness became part of the counter. Maya said she had stopped expecting anyone to fix it. That sentence hurt Eleanor because it named the deepest failure of leadership. Not that wrong had happened. Wrong always finds a way into human systems. The failure was that a good employee had stopped believing the truth had somewhere to go. Eleanor wanted to reveal herself then. She wanted to tell Maya that Monday would not unfold the way Victor expected. But revealing too early might put Maya in a position she had not chosen. So she asked only whether the notebook was safe. Maya looked at her for a long time. Maybe part of her sensed that Edith was not just a temp worker. Maybe she was too tired to name the possibility. But finally, she reached behind a flower bin and removed the wrapped notebook. She did not hand it over immediately. Her fingers tightened around it. Eleanor understood. That notebook was not just evidence. It was Maya's voice in a place that had tried to speak over her. It held late nights, failed batches, customer notes, her daughter's little drawings, and the proof that she had existed as more than labor. Eleanor promised, without revealing everything, that no one who had stolen from her would be allowed to keep deciding what the truth was worth. Maya studied her face. Then slowly, she let the notebook go. Eleanor took it with both hands. Monday morning arrived bright and cold. The flagship store opened early for the regional launch meeting. The pastry case gleamed. The sunrise honey buns sat in perfect rows, brushed with honey until they caught the light like small golden promises. A banner announced the national rollout. Victor had arranged everything carefully. Brielle wore her best smile. Kendra had curled her hair. Maya had been told to report before her review. To everyone in that room, Monday had a script. Victor would praise the launch. Brielle would be recognized for front-of-house excellence. Kendra would stand close enough to share the glow. Maya would be disciplined, possibly fired, and her notebook would disappear into management custody. The national campaign would move forward. The company would sell millions of buns under a story stolen from the woman who woke before dawn to bake them. That was the script they expected. Then Edith Lane walked in. Brielle frowned, irritated that the temp worker had appeared during a high-level meeting. Kendra whispered something under her breath. Victor began to explain that temporary support staff were not needed and that Edith could wait in the back. But Edith did not move to the back. She walked to the side of the room and placed the old blue ceramic tip jar on the table. The yellowed paper still clung to its front, the one that said, "Day staff only." Beneath the peeling edge, just visible, was the painted beam of a lighthouse. Maya went still. Brielle's smile vanished. Victor looked at the jar, then at Edith, and for the first time since Eleanor had met him, something unpolished flickered across his face. The front door opened again. Miriam Chen entered with 2 members of the audit team. Behind her came the head of human resources, company legal counsel, and the board's ethics chair. No one spoke loudly. They did not need to. Real authority has a different weight from performance. It does not have to decorate itself. Victor tried to recover. He greeted them with controlled surprise and began shaping an explanation before he even knew what had to be explained. Eleanor reached up and removed the gray scarf from her hair, then the cap, then the raincoat. For several seconds, the only sound in the flagship was the low hum of refrigeration behind the pastry case. The woman they had ignored, mocked, underpaid and ordered out of the way, was no longer Edith Lane. She was Eleanor Vale, founder and CEO of Hearth and Hollow Bakery. The name on the building, the face from the anniversary videos, the woman whose childhood promise had been printed on every cup in the store. And she had heard enough. She began not with anger, but with memory. She reminded the room that Hearth and Hollow had not been created to impress wealthy customers or polish itself into a brand too delicate for ordinary people. It had been created because once a mother and daughter with very little money were made to feel unworthy of a warm table. Every cup, every bag, every training manual, every painted wall that carried the words, "Warmth belongs to everyone," existed because of that promise. Somewhere inside this flagship, the promise had been turned into decoration. No one interrupted. Victor's expression remained controlled, but the color had begun to drain from his face. Brielle looked toward the windows, as if calculating who might be watching. Kendra folded her arms too tightly, trying to become small after years of making others feel small. Maya stood near the back, still in her work apron, afraid to trust what was happening. Eleanor described what she had seen as Edith Lane, the stale croissant, the coins treated like contamination, Samuel being steered away from the window table, nurses, delivery riders, construction workers, and elderly customers being treated as though their presence lowered the value of the room. She did not exaggerate. Cruelty rarely needs embellishment when it is finally named plainly. Then Miriam placed the first folder on the table. It held customer complaints that had never reached the executive office. Some were formal, some were anonymous. Some were written by employees who had watched customers leave in shame. Each complaint had been softened, reworded, or closed before it could become a problem for the people causing the harm. The phrase repeated again and again, resolved through coaching. In this store, coaching had not meant correction, it had meant burial. The second folder held the tip records. Kendra began to tremble. The audit team had reconstructed 14 months of tip distribution across cash, digital payments, shift edits, and deposit logs. The numbers told a story no one could laugh away. Front counter staff had received far more than policy allowed. Night bakers, dish staff, prep workers, cleaners, and temporary support workers had been systematically underpaid. Cash counts had been changed during shifts where cameras went offline. Digital tips had been routed under categories that favored Brielle and Kendra. Eleanor explained that stealing from workers did not become less serious because it happened in small amounts. It became more shameful because it targeted people least able to absorb the loss. Maya looked down, not because she was ashamed, but because the truth of what had been taken from her had finally been measured. A number can prove what your body already knew. A number can show that you were not imagining the unfairness. A number can turn months of quiet insult into evidence. Victor tried to step in. He began shaping the issue as an administrative breakdown, a training gap, a lack of clarity around policy. The words came easily, dressed in professionalism. But Eleanor knew the language of escape. She opened the third folder. This one contained the complaint trail. 6 formal complaints from Maya Reyes, one about tip distribution, one about discriminatory service, one about a delivery worker refused water, one about the velvet list, one about product ownership, one marked urgent, asking who really baked the sunrise buns. All 6 had been routed to Victor's office. All 6 had been closed before reaching Human Resources or the Ethics Board. Victor stopped speaking. There are moments when guilt becomes visible not through confession, but through the failure to keep pretending. His eyes moved once toward Brielle. It was a small mistake, but the room saw it. Eleanor revealed the undisclosed relationship next. Victor Harlan was married to Brielle's mother. He had supervised Brielle's promotions, closed complaints against her, approved disciplinary notes against employees who challenged her, and never disclosed the conflict. Nepotism might sound like an office rumor until the damage is placed beside it. Here, the damage had names: Maya, Samuel, the nurses, the delivery rider, the night bakers, the dish staff, the workers whose tips were shaved down while Brielle's authority grew. Brielle began to cry, but there is a difference between tears of remorse and tears of exposure. Remorse looks toward the people harmed. Exposure looks inward, toward what the guilty person is about to lose. Brielle's tears did not find Samuel. They did not find Maya. They turned back toward herself. Kendra tried to make herself smaller. She wanted the room to believe she had only followed Brielle, only repeated jokes, only done what the front counter culture demanded. Eleanor did not accept that. A person may not design a cruel system and still choose to enjoy it. Kendra had kept the velvet list beneath the register. Kendra had used it. She had helped decide who received slow service, old pastries, cold eyes, and shame disguised as atmosphere. Then Miriam placed the small notebook from beneath the register beside the tip jar. The velvet list looked harmless from the outside, with a little gold pattern on the cover. Inside were descriptions and labels for customers the cashiers had chosen to discourage: coin man, raincoat woman, scrub ghosts, delivery kid, bench sleeper, slow widow. There were notes about who tipped badly, who paid in change, who took too long, who lowered the look of the room, who should be told seats were limited even when they were not. Samuel had been listed too, not by name at first, but by description: old bus cap, window table, pennies, anniversary mornings. Maya covered her mouth. She knew what those mornings meant to Samuel. She knew because she had bothered to learn. Brielle and Kendra had known enough to use his tenderness against him. That was the difference between service and cruelty. Both notice details. One uses them to care. The other uses them to wound. Samuel had agreed to come in if needed, and Eleanor had made sure he would not be turned into a spectacle. He entered quietly, holding his navy cap. The room shifted with discomfort. People often prefer victims to remain abstract. Numbers can be reviewed. Complaints can be filed. But a person standing in front of you with hurt in his eyes removes the luxury of distance. Samuel did not accuse loudly. He was not built for public anger. His presence was testimony enough. Eleanor summarized what had happened to him with care. He had been a loyal customer since the early days. He had shared this store with his wife. After she passed, the window table helped him remember a part of his life grief had not taken. The cruelty done to him was not just bad service. It was the disrespect of a memory. Samuel placed the worn photograph of himself and June beside the tip jar. In the picture, they sat at the window table, smiling over a shared pastry. It was evidence of another kind, evidence that the people reduced to categories had lives, loves, rituals, and losses. Brielle could not look at him. Only after Samuel was offered the window table did Eleanor turn to the matter everyone had feared most: the sunrise honey buns. On the display table, beneath the tasteful launch sign, The pastries gleamed as if innocent of the theft surrounding them. They were beautiful. That was part of the pain. Maya's work was beautiful. Her care had survived even in the hands of people who wanted her erased. Victor had mistaken that beauty for a product he could own. Eleanor opened Maya's notebook. Maya inhaled sharply, but Eleanor looked toward her first, making it clear that the notebook was not being taken from her anymore. It was being recognized. The pages were shown to the room. Dates appeared, ingredient tests, failed versions, notes about humidity, glaze texture, customer memories, a sketch of a bun designed to catch light, the phrase about making morning feel forgiving, the lighthouse drawn beside the final version. Then Miriam displayed Victor's regional proposal, submitted months later using nearly identical language and product notes that followed Maya's development path almost exactly. Victor tried one final defense. He claimed that ideas developed within store operations belonged to the company. He implied that Maya misunderstood collaborative innovation. He suggested that leadership refined, scattered contributions into scalable products. It sounded intelligent until Eleanor placed one more document on the table. It was the employee innovation policy she herself had approved years earlier. The policy stated clearly that employees who created products selected for regional or national rollout were to receive formal credit, a development bonus, and internal royalty compensation were applicable. Eleanor had insisted on that policy because she knew creativity did not only live in corporate test kitchens. Sometimes it lived in tired people working odd hours, listening closely to customers no executive ever met. Victor had violated policy. More than that, he had violated trust. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged, finally, to the truth. Eleanor then did what everyone had expected Victor to do to Maya. She began the review. But it was not Maya's employment being reviewed. It was the conduct of the people who had built a private kingdom inside a company that was supposed to serve everyone. Brielle Voss was terminated first. Eleanor stated the reasons clearly: discriminatory treatment of customers, retaliation against co-workers, manipulation of tip distribution, and participation in a hostile store culture that directly contradicted company values. Her quarterly bonus would be frozen pending legal review of stolen tips. The matter would be documented fully, not softened into personality conflict, not hidden behind coaching language, and not buried to protect the brand from embarrassment. Brielle looked stunned, as if she had never truly believed consequences were meant for people like her. She had mistaken favoritism for invincibility. Now the shield was gone, and all that remained was the record of what she had done when she thought no one powerful was watching. Kendra Pike was terminated next. Eleanor did not allow her lesser rank to become a hiding place. Kendra had kept the velvet list, helped manipulate tips, participated in customer mistreatment, and turned cruelty into entertainment. Her fear in that moment could not erase the fear she had caused in others. Then Eleanor turned to Victor. The bakery seemed to hold its breath. Victor Harlan was terminated for cause, not asked to resign, not reassigned, not allowed to call it a mutual decision. Terminated. The reasons were placed into the record one by one: undisclosed conflict of interest, retaliation against employees, suppression of formal complaints, falsification of internal summaries, failure to enforce tip policy, theft of employee-created product work, and conduct unbecoming of leadership. His innovation bonuses connected to Maya's recipes would be clawed back. His regional launch authority was revoked immediately. Legal counsel would determine further action based on the financial and intellectual property review. Victor did not rage. Rage would have been too honest. Instead, he looked offended, as if the greater injustice was that his Polish had failed to protect him. When security escorted him out, he passed the wall where the slogan was painted. Warmth belongs to everyone. For the first time, the words seemed to be looking back at him. But justice could not end with firing the guilty. Punishment stops the breaking from continuing. It does not repair what has already been broken. So Eleanor turned to the staff. This was the harder part. It would have been easy to treat everyone else as innocent because they had not been the loudest. It would have been easy to let the room applaud the fall of villains. But Eleanor had seen too much silence to leave it untouched. She told them that fear was real. She would not pretend childcare, medical bills, and survival did not shape the courage people felt able to show. But she also told them that a company becomes cruel not only when cruel people act, but when decent people decide that looking away is safer than standing beside someone being harmed. No one was fired for being afraid that morning, but no one was allowed to call fear a virtue. Hearth and Hollow would retrain the flagship from the ground up. The regional complaint process would be removed from manager control. Employees would receive direct access to an independent ethics channel. Tip distribution would become transparent on every paycheck. Digital records would be visible to eligible staff. Camera outages during cash handling would trigger automatic review. Undisclosed family reporting relationships would require immediate investigation. And every employee, from the front counter to the dish station to night production, would be treated as part of the guest experience, because the warmth customers feel in the morning often begins with someone unseen working in the dark. Then Eleanor faced Maya. For a moment, the founder of a 58-store company seemed less like a CEO and more like the little girl who once sat near a restroom with her mother, promising herself that someday she would build something kinder. She apologized, not with the easy apology of a public statement, but with the weight of a person taking responsibility for a system built in her name. She admitted that she had allowed reports to replace listening. She had allowed growth to create distance. She had believed the promise because she had written it, when she should have been checking whether others were living it. Maya did not know what to do with the apology. People who have been dismissed for too long sometimes struggle to receive recognition without bracing for the cost. Her eyes moved from Eleanor to the notebook, then to the honey buns in the case, then to the staff who had watched her be corrected, reduced, and nearly erased. Eleanor announced that the national rollout would continue, but it would be corrected. The Sunrise Honey Buns would launch under Maya Reyes's name. Every menu board, training document, product story, and marketing asset would identify her as the creator. She would receive the product development bonus she should have received months earlier, along with back compensation for the internal royalty period Victor had stolen. Her notebook would remain hers, with copies made only by consent and only for documenting authorship. And if Maya chose to continue developing products for Hearth and Hollow, it would be through a formal role with salary, schedule protection, and creative authority. Maya's hand went to the edge of the prep table as if the room had tilted. For so long, her work had been treated as something that could be taken because she needed the job too much to fight back. Now the same work was being named in front of everyone, not borrowed, not inspired by, not refined from a team concept, created by Maya Reyes. Eleanor offered her the position of Regional Product Development Lead, for community bakery innovation. It was a role designed not to remove Maya from the people who inspired her work, but to give her the power to bring their stories into the menu without letting anyone steal the credit again. Maya did not answer immediately. The silence was not rejection. It was the sound of a person trying to let dignity return to places where humiliation had been stored. Then Maya nodded. The room exhaled. It would be tempting to say everything changed in that instant. Stories often like clean turning points, but real healing is rarely so neat. The employees who had stayed silent did not become brave all at once. The customers who had been wounded did not magically forget. Maya did not walk out untouched by what had been done to her. Eleanor did not forgive herself simply because she had finally acted. Justice can open a door, but people still have to walk through, carrying the weight of what came before. Yet something real did change. Eleanor reached for the blue tip jar. She peeled away the yellowed paper Brielle had taped across it. The adhesive resisted at first, as if unfairness had become comfortable there. Then the paper tore free. Beneath it, the original words appeared in Maya's careful painted lettering. For everyone who keeps the light on. No one clapped. It would have felt too small, too theatrical. Instead, the staff stood in a silence that finally had respect inside it. Maya touched the jar with her fingertips. The lighthouse she had painted years earlier looked imperfect and beautiful, its beam stretching across the curve of the ceramic. She had made it after putting her daughter to bed, during a time when she still believed the store could become a shared place. That belief had been mocked, covered, and nearly broken. But it had not been erased. The repairs began that week. Every underpaid employee received corrected tip payments, covering 14 months, with interest. For some, it was a few $100s. For others, it was enough to catch up on rent, repair a car, pay a medical bill, or buy groceries without calculating every item twice. Eleanor personally signed the letters that accompanied the payments, though she knew a letter could not undo the insult of needing money that had been yours all along. The flagship closed for retraining, not for a cosmetic renovation, for a reckoning. The polished tables stayed. The pastry case stayed. The slogan stayed. But the meaning of the room changed because the people inside it were forced to face what they had allowed. Several employees apologized to Maya privately. Some apologies were awkward. Some were late. Some were more about guilt than repair. Maya accepted none too quickly. She had learned that kindness without change could become another performance. But over time, she allowed certain people to earn back small pieces of trust. The junior cashier who had once stayed silent began arriving early to help night staff transition into morning service. The dishwasher, who had feared losing hours, joined the new employee council. The shift lead who had let Brielle dominate the front counter stepped down from leadership until retraining was complete. Not everyone became noble, but some became honest, and honesty was a beginning. Samuel returned on the reopening morning. There were no cameras invited. Eleanor refused to turn his pain into a marketing campaign. No press release mentioned him. No staged photograph was posted. Maya baked the first tray herself, though her new role no longer required her to arrive before dawn. She said she wanted to make this batch with her own hands, not for the company, for the table by the window. When Samuel entered, he paused the way he always did. The room was different, though the furniture had not moved much. The difference was in the attention. No one rushed him. No one sighed at his coins. No one steered him away from sunlight. A fresh sunrise honey bun waited for him, not as charity, not as apology wrapped in pity, but as the restoration of ordinary respect. Maya had written his name on the bag in blue ink. Samuel sat at the window table and placed June's photograph beside his coffee. For a while, he simply looked at the pastry. Grief does not disappear because a bakery becomes kinder. A dead wife does not return because a table is saved. But cruelty had added an unnecessary wound to Samuel's mourning, and that wound, at least, could be tended. He broke the bun in half, as he used to do when June was alive. One half remained on the napkin across from him. Maya turned away for a moment, not because she wanted to hide from sadness, but because some forms of love are too private to stare at directly. Eleanor watched from a distance. She thought of her mother. She thought of that winter bakery. She thought of how easily a child's wound had become a company, and how easily a company had almost become the very thing that caused the wound. That was the danger of success. It could make people forget that every polished system began as someone's answer to pain. Maya's new work changed Hearth and Hollow slowly. She did not create products by chasing trends. She listened. She visited night crews, bus depots, hospital break rooms, laundromats, early morning markets, and stores where employees had spent years believing their ideas did not count. She asked workers what they ate when no one saw them. She asked widows what food reminded them of being loved. She asked parents what they bought when they had enough for only one treat. From those answers came pastries that did not feel invented by a committee. They felt remembered into being. The first menu under Maya's leadership kept the sunrise honey bun in its place, but now the menu card carried her name clearly. Created by Maya Reyes. Some customers barely noticed. Employees noticed most of all. In break rooms across the region, bakers who had spent years believing ideas only counted when managers repeated them began writing things down. Dishwashers suggested waste-reducing fillings. Baristas proposed pairings based on regulars they knew by heart. Prep workers shared family breads. The company discovered that creativity had never been scarce. It had only been ignored. Eleanor changed, too. She stopped trusting beautiful reports without ugly questions. She visited stores without warning, not to frighten people, but to listen before language became polished. She created a monthly founders table where employees from any level could speak without regional managers in the room. She tied leadership bonuses not only to revenue, but to staff retention, complaint resolution quality, tip transparency, and customer dignity. Some executives resisted the changes quietly. They worried about cost, complexity, exposure, and risk. Eleanor reminded them that the greater risk had already walked through the flagship wearing a raincoat and carrying coins. A company that cannot survive honesty does not deserve protection from it. As for Victor, Brielle, and Kendra, their consequences continued beyond that Monday. Victor lost his innovation bonuses and his reputation for calm excellence. Once the stolen labor and borrowed language were removed, there was little left behind his polished vocabulary. Brielle learned that charm and family protection could open doors, but could not keep them open after trust was gone. Kendra learned that cruelty enjoyed in groups can still be accounted for individually. None of them were destroyed for entertainment. They were simply made to live in a world where the consequences they had given others finally reached them. That was poetic justice, not because it was dramatic, but because it was exact. They had made people feel unwelcome, and they lost their place in the company. They had stolen tips, and the money was taken back. Victor had erased Maya's name, and his own name was removed from the launch he had tried to claim. Brielle had covered the lighthouse on the tip jar, and now the whole company saw what she had tried to hide. Months later, on a cold morning much like the one that had first brought Eleanor's mother into that old bakery decades ago, the flagship store filled before sunrise. Not with influencers, not with investors, not with people chosen for how well they matched the brand. It filled with bus drivers, nurses, office workers, parents, delivery riders, retirees, students, and construction crews warming their hands around paper cups. Some paid with cards, some paid with cash, some counted coins. No one behind the counter made them feel smaller for it. Maya stood near the pastry case, no longer hidden in the back unless she chose to be. Her daughter Lucia had come in before school, wearing a backpack nearly half her size. She pointed at the menu where her mother's name appeared beneath the sunrise honey bun. Children understand recognition more purely than adults do. To Lucia, those words meant her mother had made something beautiful, and the world had finally admitted it. Eleanor watched Maya lift her daughter so she could see the lighthouse tip jar on the counter. The original paint had been sealed to protect it, but its imperfections remained. The beam was uneven. The letters curved slightly. The blue glaze had a tiny chip near the base. No designer would have approved it as a national brand asset. That was why Eleanor loved it. It was not perfect. It was true. Samuel sat at the window table, his coffee steaming beside June's photograph. No one rushed him. No one treated his grief as an inconvenience. Sometimes Maya sat with him for a minute before her meetings. Sometimes they said very little. Warmth does not always need many words. Sometimes it is simply allowing someone to remain where love once found them. The slogan on the wall stayed the same. Warmth belongs to everyone. But after everything that happened, those words no longer felt like paint. They felt like a responsibility renewed each morning by the people who unlocked the doors, mixed the dough, wiped the tables, counted the tips, and chose how to see whoever walked in next. Because cruelty rarely enters a workplace wearing a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears a clean apron and a practiced smile. Sometimes it speaks in policy language. Sometimes it calls discrimination atmosphere, theft adjustment, retaliation coaching, and silence professionalism. And kindness, real kindness, is not proven by how warmly people treat someone powerful. Anyone can smile upward. Character is revealed in how people treat the tired woman with coins, the old man with a photograph, the night baker with flour on her sleeves, and the worker whose name is not printed anywhere yet. Eleanor learned that a company can lose its soul one small permission at a time, one ignored complaint, one stolen idea, one cruel joke, one old pastry handed to someone deemed unworthy of fresh bread, one manager who protects family instead of truth, one room full of people who see harm and decide silence is safer. But a soul can also be recovered. One honest act at a time, one complaint finally read, one notebook protected, one tip jar uncovered, one name restored, one table returned to a grieving man, one worker reminded that the light she kept burning in the dark was seen after all. Maya did not become important on the day Eleanor revealed the truth. She had always been important. Samuel did not become worthy when the CEO apologized. He had always been worthy. The night staff did not become part of the guest experience when policy finally recognized them. They had always been part of it. Justice did not create their value. Justice only forced the company to stop denying it. And maybe that is the lesson worth carrying beyond one bakery, one counter, one stolen recipe, or one hidden notebook. Kindness is not a slogan on a wall. It is not a polished logo, a seasonal campaign, or a sentence printed on a cup. Kindness is what remains when no one is filming, when the customer has no influence, when the employee has no protection, when the complaint would be easier to bury, and when doing the right thing costs more than saying the right thing. So the next time you stand in line and see someone being treated as if they do not belong, remember Samuel at the window table. Remember Maya in the night kitchen. Remember the old blue tip jar with the lighthouse painted on it. And remember that silence may feel safe in the moment, but it always helps someone build a darker room. If you believe every hardworking person deserves to be seen, leave a like and tell us in the comments. Would you have spoken up if you had been standing in that line? The slap changed everything.
You do not tell me no.
Daniela stood frozen, stunned and deeply hurt, unable to understand why she had been slapped for simply doing her job.
Did anyone see that?
Her badge became a weapon.
People in your position should know better.
She had only followed protocol.
This corridor is restricted. Please return to reception.
Helen knew the truth.
She was helping me.
Vivian's lie found protection.
Get her out of my hospital. I never want to see her here again.
I'll handle it.
No one asked why.
You took my badge, but you never asked if I was hurt.
Silence followed her out.
I am sorry.
Then she called Samuel.
Samuel, they took my badge. They threw me out.
But it had begun earlier. Earlier that day, a chain reaction collision on the interstate had brought more than 20 injured people through the hospital doors in less than an hour. The trauma bays filled first, then the recovery rooms, then every space that could safely hold a patient with monitoring equipment. Nurses were called from outpatient services, surgical recovery, and specialty clinics. Doctors who had expected routine consultations found themselves treating internal bleeding, fractured ribs, head injuries, and terrified children separated from their parents. The hospital was not merely busy, it was stretched to its edge. In the middle of that crisis, Vivian Hollis arrived for a procedure that was never meant to be urgent. Vivian was 61 years old, immaculately dressed, sharply composed, and accustomed to entering rooms as though they had been built for her. Her family name appeared on plaques throughout the city. The Hollis Foundation had funded scholarship programs, museum exhibits, political campaigns, and hospital projects. 3 years earlier, the foundation had pledged several $1 million to St. Alden for a pediatric expansion that had not yet been completed. To most people in the hospital, Vivian was not just a donor. She was a force. The staff knew that her complaints reached the executive offices faster than emergency calls reached certain departments. They knew she had private contact numbers for members of the board. They knew that when Vivian Hollis was unhappy, someone usually found a way to make the problem disappear. That afternoon, the problem was supposed to be Daniela. Vivian had been scheduled for a minor cosmetic dermatology procedure in the outpatient wing. It was not dangerous. It was not time-sensitive. It could have been performed another day without any risk to her health. But the procedure required a small recovery area, nursing support, and a team that had suddenly been reassigned to patients coming out of emergency surgery. Daniela had been asked to help coordinate the delays. She approached Vivian with the same professionalism she gave every patient. She explained that the hospital was responding to a mass casualty event and that several staff members needed for Vivian's appointment had been pulled into critical care. She assured her that the procedure would be rescheduled quickly and that the medical team would contact her personally once the crisis had stabilized. It should have been a simple explanation. Instead, Vivian stared at Daniela as though she had been personally insulted. At first, Vivian spoke in the controlled, polished tone of someone who wanted to make sure everyone nearby understood that she believed herself to be above the inconvenience. She questioned why a hospital that had accepted millions from her family could not find one nurse and one room for a procedure that had been scheduled weeks earlier. Daniela explained again that patients with life-threatening injuries were being prioritized. That was when Vivian's expression changed. Her words became colder. Her patience became theatrical. She made comments about Daniela's manner, her accent, and the idea that someone in Daniela's position had the authority to tell her no. She did not need to shout at first. Her contempt was sharper when delivered quietly. Daniela had dealt with angry families before. She had been blamed for wait times she could not control, for outcomes she could not change, and for rules she did not create. She understood that fear often made people cruel, but Vivian was not afraid. Vivian was offended. There was a difference. Daniela stayed calm. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply repeated the truth that mattered most. The hospital had limited resources at that moment, and those resources had to go to the patients whose lives depended on them. Vivian seemed almost stunned that the answer did not change. To her, money had always changed answers. When she realized Daniela would not bend, Vivian removed her phone from her handbag and called Graham Mercer. Graham was the chief operating officer of St. Alden Regional. He had spent years building a reputation as a polished administrator who could calm donors, impress board members, and make difficult situations look manageable. He was known for speaking about integrity in public meetings and efficiency in private ones. But inside the hospital, people had learned that his definition of efficiency often depended on who was upset and how much influence that person had. He answered Vivian's call almost immediately. Daniela could hear only fragments of the conversation from where she stood, but she did not need to hear every word to understand what was happening. Vivian's tone was carefully wounded. She described herself as being mistreated. She framed Daniela's refusal to ignore triage rules as disrespect. She suggested that the hospital had forgotten who helped keep its doors open. Within minutes, Graham arrived in person. He did not ask what had happened in the emergency department. He did not ask how many trauma patients had arrived. He did not ask why Daniela had made the decision she did. He looked first at Vivian, then at Daniela, and it became clear that he had already chosen whose version of the story mattered. Graham took Daniela aside and told her that she would be moved temporarily to the third floor. The explanation sounded harmless on the surface. He said the situation had become tense and that it would be better for everyone if Daniela worked somewhere else for the remainder of the shift. But Daniela understood exactly what it was. It was punishment disguised as conflict management. She had followed the hospital's policies. She had protected emergency patients. She had spoken respectfully. Yet Graham was moving her because Vivian Hollis had complained. Daniela considered protesting. She considered asking him to put the order in writing. But a call came through about an elderly patient upstairs who needed assistance, and the emergency department remained overwhelmed. In that moment, she made the choice she always made when things were difficult. She put the patients first. She accepted the transfer and went upstairs. For the next 40 minutes, Daniela worked in the third-floor observation unit, helping nurses manage overflow from the emergency department. The patients there were not all critically injured, but many needed monitoring after surgery, after falls, or after sudden medical episodes that could become serious without warning. One of them was Helen Ward. Mrs. Ward was 78 years old and had come to St. Alden after becoming dizzy at home. Her daughter was stuck in traffic after the interstate accident, and Helen had been alone for most of the afternoon. She was frightened, but trying not to show it. Daniela noticed the way the woman kept watching the hallway each time footsteps passed, hoping someone familiar would appear. Daniela took a few extra minutes to explain what the doctors were monitoring. She adjusted the blanket around Helen's shoulders, made sure her call button was within reach, and promised that someone would keep her informed. To Daniela, it was a small act of care. To Helen, was the only moment that day when she felt like more than a chart number. That kindness would matter later. At the time, Daniela had no way of knowing that Vivian Hollis was moving through the same floor, angry that she had not been given the private route and private attention she believed she deserved. Vivian had been offered a quiet waiting area near the outpatient department while her procedure was formally postponed. But waiting was not something she accepted easily. She had left that area on her own, determined to find someone who would make the hospital's inconvenience disappear. A volunteer had told her that a private exit on the third floor could lead more directly to the parking structure. The volunteer did not know that the route required going through a staff-only corridor. Vivian either did not hear the warning or did not care. When she stepped into the restricted hallway, she saw Daniela near Helen Ward's room. To a reasonable person, it would have looked like coincidence. To Vivian, it became proof of a story she had already invented. She saw the nurse who had refused her. She saw the same steady expression that had made her feel powerless downstairs. And in that moment, Vivian decided that Daniela's presence could not possibly be part of her work. It had to be defiance. Daniela noticed Vivian before Vivian spoke. She recognized the sound of expensive heels against the polished hospital floor. She turned and saw the woman standing near the restricted access sign, her face tense with anger. Daniela did not accuse her. She did not make a scene. She simply reminded Vivian that she was in a staff-only area and offered to help her return to the public corridor. That should have ended it. But Vivian had already crossed the line where reason mattered. She began raising her voice. She accused Daniela of following her. She suggested that Daniela had been waiting for a chance to embarrass her again. Her words were loud enough to draw attention from nearby rooms and the nurses' station. Daniela tried to keep the situation contained. She told Vivian that she was assigned to the third floor and had been there since being moved by administration. She said that the hallway was restricted for patient safety and that Vivian needed to leave the area. Vivian did not want an explanation. She wanted a target. She stepped closer. The air in the corridor seemed to change. People began to watch, but no one stepped forward. The orderly with the linens stopped near the wall. A respiratory therapist paused outside a room. Dr. Megan Blake emerged from the charting station with a look of concern, then hesitation. Vivian reached for Daniela's hospital badge. The motion was so sudden that Daniela barely had time to react. Vivian pulled the badge free from its clip, looked at Daniela's name, then held it as though it were proof that she had the right person. She accused Daniela of harassing a donor. She accused her of making threats. She accused her of disrespecting the hospital. None of it was true. Daniela did not shout back. She did not try to grab the badge. She did not even defend herself in the way Vivian seemed to expect. The restraint on Daniela's face only seemed to make Vivian angrier, because there was nothing she could use as evidence of aggression. So she created it. The slap came fast. It was hard enough to turn Daniela's head to the side. Helen Ward saw it from the doorway of her room. Dr. Megan Blake saw it from only a few feet away. The orderly saw it. The respiratory therapist saw it. The nurses near the station saw it. Several people saw the exact moment Vivian became the aggressor. And yet, in the first seconds afterward, no one said a word. Daniela slowly turned back toward Vivian. One hand rose to her cheek, not dramatically, not with anger, but almost as though she needed to confirm what had just happened. Vivian stood there breathing heavily, looking less ashamed than triumphant. She knew what her money had bought her in the past. She knew that people often chose safety over truth. Then Graham Mercer arrived. No one knew who had called him. Perhaps Vivian had done it herself. Perhaps someone at the front desk had already alerted his office. Either way, he appeared with the speed of a man who understood that a powerful donor in distress could become a public relations disaster. He walked into the corridor, took one look at Vivian, and went directly to her. He asked if she was all right. He asked if she needed medical attention. He asked if anyone had made her feel unsafe. He did not ask Daniela why her cheek was red. He did not ask why Vivian was standing in a restricted hallway. He did not ask the people who had witnessed the incident what they had seen. Vivian told Graham that Daniela had confronted her again. She claimed that the nurse had followed her upstairs and behaved aggressively. She implied that she had only reacted because she felt threatened. Graham listened as though every word were already proven. Then he turned to Daniela. His expression was not angry. That would have been easier to understand. It was colder than anger. It was the expression of someone who had decided that one employee's dignity was an acceptable price for protecting a donor relationship. He asked Daniela to hand over her badge. For the first time that day, something inside her seemed to shift. Not because she was guilty, not because she believed anyone had the right to treat her this way, but because she realized the hospital was not even pretending to care about the truth. She handed him the badge. Graham informed her that she was being placed on administrative leave pending review. He did not say that Vivian had struck her. He did not mention witnesses. He did not say an investigation would begin immediately. He used careful language about avoiding further disruption and preserving the hospital's reputation. Reputation. That was what mattered. Not the nurse who had been assaulted. Not the patients who had watched adults fail them. Not the message sent to every staff member in the hallway who now understood that doing the right thing could cost them their job if the wrong person became offended. Graham instructed Daniela to leave through the employee exit near the parking garage. He said it would be better than walking through the main lobby while the situation was still sensitive. Daniela understood the real reason. He wanted her gone quietly. He wanted Vivian protected from questions. And he wanted the hospital to appear calm, even if calm had to be built on a lie. As Daniela walked toward the back exit, she passed the same people who had watched Vivian strike her. Some looked ashamed. Some looked frightened. Some could not meet her eyes at all. Dr. Megan Blake stood near the nurse's station, holding the patient file so tightly that the edges bent beneath her fingers. She looked like she wanted to say something. Daniela could see it in her face, but Megan remained silent. Lillian Park, the charge nurse on duty, was not in the hallway when the slap happened. She arrived minutes later and saw only the aftermath. Daniela without her badge, Vivian surrounded by administrators, and Graham speaking in the low, controlled tone he used when he wanted people to stop asking questions. Lillian had worked at St. Alden for more than 20 years. She had watched Graham reward obedience and punish resistance. She had seen nurses move to undesirable shifts after speaking too openly in meetings. She had seen staff members blamed for problems created by budget cuts. She had learned to protect herself by staying careful. But when she saw Daniela walking toward the employee exit with one hand pressed lightly against her cheek, something in Lillian's carefully built silence began to crack. Daniela did not cry in the hallway. She waited until she reached the parking garage. Outside, the late afternoon sun had started to fade behind the city buildings. Ambulances still arrived at the emergency entrance on the other side of the hospital. From where Daniela stood, she could hear distant sirens and the faint hum of traffic. Life was continuing as though nothing had happened. Her phone felt heavy in her hand. For several minutes, she did not call anyone. She sat in her car without starting it, staring at the badge clip still attached to her uniform, even though the badge itself had been taken away. That small, empty piece of plastic seemed to say everything. 8 years of loyalty, reduced to an absence. Eventually, she called Samuel Reed. Samuel was not a politician. He was not a lawyer. He was not someone who enjoyed using his title to intimidate people. He was a physician, the director of emergency services for Horizon Medical Alliance, one of the largest regional health systems in the state. He had spent most of his career working in emergency medicine, where decisions had to be made quickly, and where the difference between arrogance and competence could mean the difference between life and death. He understood pressure. He understood grief. He understood that hospitals could be flawed places run by people who were too tired, too ambitious, or too afraid. But when Daniela told him what had happened, he did not interrupt her with promises of revenge. He listened. She told him about Vivian's appointment. She told him about the interstate accident. She told him how Graham had moved her because Vivian was angry. She told him about the restricted hallway, the stolen badge, the slap, the silence, and the order to leave through the back. By the time she finished, Samuel was quiet for a long moment. He knew Daniela well enough to understand that she would not exaggerate. She was not someone who turned every insult into a crisis. She had spent years standing up for patients without making herself the center of the story. So when she said she had been treated like a criminal for following triage rules, he believed her. But Samuel also knew something Daniela was too hurt to think about at that moment. The next morning, he was scheduled to visit St. Alden Regional as part of Horizon's preliminary evaluation of a possible merger. Horizon had been considering whether to bring St. Alden into its network, a move that could mean new equipment, expanded trauma services, financial stability, and access to a larger regional system. St. Alden wanted that merger badly. Graham Mercer wanted it badly too. Samuel did not tell Daniela that he would use the visit to punish anyone. He did not promise that Vivian would regret what she had done. He did not suggest that his title could erase the humiliation Daniela had suffered. Instead, he reminded her of something she had told countless patients and families over the years. When the truth matters, details matter. He encouraged her to write down everything while it was fresh. The timeline, the names of witnesses, the location, the words Graham used, the fact that Vivian had entered a restricted corridor, the fact that Daniela had been transferred to that floor by Graham himself. The fact that no one had asked her for a statement before taking her badge. Daniela spent most of the night doing exactly that. She wrote slowly at first, then more steadily. The more she recorded, the clearer the pattern became. This was not only about one woman losing her temper. It was about a hospital administrator who had chosen a donor over a nurse before the assault had even happened. By midnight, Daniela had completed a formal complaint. She included no dramatic language, no insults, no threats, only facts. The next morning, Graham Mercer arrived at St. Alden, expecting to host an important meeting with Horizon Medical Alliance. He expected polished presentations, financial projections, and conversations about expansion. He expected to emphasize the hospital's strong community reputation and the promise of the pediatric wing the Hollis Foundation might help complete. Instead, he found Samuel Reed standing in the executive conference room. For a brief moment, Graham did not recognize him. Then he saw the name card on the table, and his face changed. Samuel was not there as Daniela's fiancé, at least not officially. He was there as Horizon's Director of Emergency Services and a senior member of the clinical evaluation team. Graham greeted him with the smooth confidence of an administrator who believed he still controlled the room. But Samuel's manner was different from what Graham expected. He was polite, professional, and calm. He asked about trauma capacity, staffing ratios, patient safety reporting, and the hospital's policies for protecting employees from workplace violence. At first, Graham answered as though the questions were routine. Then Samuel asked how St. Alden handled incidents in which staff members reported being assaulted by patients, visitors, or donors. The room became still. Graham gave the standard answer. He spoke about zero tolerance. He mentioned reporting procedures, security protocols, and employee support services. Samuel listened without reacting. Then he asked whether those procedures had been followed the previous afternoon. Graham's confidence began to fade. He did not yet know the full extent of Daniela's complaint. He did not know how much Samuel knew. He did not know whether the matter had already reached Horizon's legal and ethics teams. But he understood one thing. The nurse he had sent out through the back exit was not going to disappear quietly. And somewhere inside the hospital, in a corridor filled with cameras no one had bothered to review, the truth was waiting. The truth did not arrive at St. Alden Regional Hospital all at once. It came in pieces. First, it came through Daniela's written complaint, which was so precise that even Graham Mercer could not dismiss it as an emotional reaction. Daniela had documented the time Vivian Hollis arrived, the reason her procedure had been postponed, the fact that emergency resources had been diverted to victims of the interstate collision, and the order Graham gave to move her to the 3rd floor. She listed the names of everyone she remembered seeing in the hallway after the assault. She described how Vivian had entered a restricted corridor, taken her badge, accused her of following her, and struck her in front of witnesses. Most importantly, Daniela included the part Graham had hoped she would leave out. She described how he had treated Vivian as the victim before anyone had even asked what happened. She described how he had taken her badge without hearing her account. She described how he had told her to leave through the employee exit, not because there was a safety concern, but because he wanted the incident to disappear before anyone in the main lobby had a chance to notice. Daniela did not use dramatic words. She did not call Graham corrupt. She did not call Vivian dangerous. She did not try to make herself sound heroic. She simply told the truth in the clearest way she knew how. And that was exactly what made the complaint difficult to bury. By mid-morning, the document had reached the hospital's Human Resources Department, the Internal Compliance Office, and the legal team responsible for reviewing workplace violence incidents. Normally, Graham would have found a way to slow the process down. He knew how institutions worked. He knew that paperwork could vanish into review cycles, that meetings could be postponed, and that people often became tired before the truth became inconvenient for the right people. But this time, the complaint had arrived on the same morning that Horizon Medical Alliance was evaluating St. Alden for a potential merger. That timing changed everything. Samuel Reed had already disclosed his personal relationship with Daniela to Horizon's ethics office before stepping into the conference room. He made it clear that he would not be involved in deciding whether Daniela's complaint was valid, whether discipline was appropriate, or whether the hospital should face legal consequences. He understood that Daniela deserved a fair investigation, not a favor disguised as justice. But he also made something else clear. Any hospital seeking to join Horizon's network would be evaluated not only on finances, equipment, and patient volume, but also on culture. A hospital could have polished floors, impressive fundraising brochures, and a long list of wealthy supporters, but none of that mattered if employees were afraid to report violence. None of it mattered if administrators allowed money to determine who received care and who received protection. To Samuel, the question was no longer whether St. Alden had a public relations problem. The question was whether St. Alden had a moral problem. Graham tried to answer with the language he knew best. He spoke about confusion. He mentioned that Vivian Hollis had felt threatened. He suggested that the situation had unfolded quickly and that everyone was still gathering facts. But the more carefully he spoke, the more obvious it became that he had never intended to gather facts at all. He had gathered influence. He had gathered fear. He had gathered the silence of people who believed that protecting themselves was safer than protecting the truth. Samuel did not argue with him. He did not need to. He simply asked that the meeting be paused while Horizon's clinical review team received an updated report on the hospital's employee safety policies, donor access procedures, and incident response records from the previous 12 months. That request sounded routine. For Graham, it was devastating, because St. Alden did have records, and records had a way of remembering what frightened people tried to forget. While the executive offices struggled to contain the growing problem, Lillian Park sat alone in a small staff lounge on the 3rd floor, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. She had worked at St. Alden long enough to know how these situations usually ended. The person with the least power became the easiest person to blame. The employee who followed policy was called difficult. The patient, donor, or executive who caused the harm was treated carefully, gently, almost respectfully, as though their status had transformed bad behavior into a misunderstanding. Lillian had seen it happen before. Years earlier, a surgical technician had reported that a visiting physician was verbally abusive towards staff. The technician had been told that he was too sensitive. Another time, a nurse complained that a board member's family member had entered a restricted unit after visiting hours. The nurse was quietly moved to a less desirable schedule 2 weeks later. No one said the transfer was punishment, but everyone understood why it happened. Lillian had never forgotten those moments. She had also never forgiven herself for surviving them by staying quiet. When she saw Daniela leaving through the employee exit the afternoon before, something inside her had broken open. Daniela had not been reckless. She had not been rude. She had not gone looking for conflict. She had simply done what nurses were trained to do: protect the people whose needs were most urgent. And for that, she had been humiliated. Lillian opened her work laptop and began searching through staffing records. At first, she only intended to confirm Daniela's transfer to the 3rd floor. But as she reviewed the scheduling logs, she found something else. The transfer order had not been entered through the normal staffing system. Graham had called it in directly to the shift supervisor, bypassing the usual documentation process. There was no written concern about Daniela's performance. No formal complaint from Vivian, no safety note, no record that Daniela had done anything wrong. There was only the abrupt transfer. Then Lillian found an email from 3 months earlier. It had been sent by Graham to a small group of department managers. The message was brief, but its meaning was unmistakable. It instructed staff to make reasonable accommodations for Vivian Hollis and her family whenever possible, especially when they visited the hospital for non-emergency care. The email did not openly say that Vivian should be allowed to skip triage rules. It was more careful than that, but the wording left little room for interpretation. Graham had encouraged staff to treat the Hollis family as exceptional. In a hospital, exceptional treatment could become dangerous very quickly. Lillian read the message 3 times. Then she forwarded it to the compliance office. She added a statement of her own. For the first time in years, she did not soften the truth. She explained that Graham's approach had created a culture in which employees believed powerful donors could complain their way around medical policy. She described how staff members had learned to avoid conflict with Vivian even when her requests were unreasonable. She admitted that she had not spoken up sooner because she feared retaliation. Her hands shook as she pressed send, but after the message disappeared from her screen, Lillian felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt lighter. Not because the fear was gone, because she had finally stopped allowing fear to decide who she was. Across the hospital, Dr. Megan Blake was facing a different kind of battle. Megan had become a doctor because she believed medicine was an act of courage. She had imagined courage as the ability to work through exhaustion, make difficult diagnoses, deliver bad news, and stand steady when families were falling apart. She had not imagined that courage could also mean speaking when everyone around her was silent. The moment Vivian slapped Daniela had replayed in Megan's mind all night. Each time she remembered it, she saw something new. She saw the way Daniela had not moved toward Vivian. She saw the way Vivian grabbed the badge first. She saw the way Graham arrived and immediately turned his attention toward the woman with money instead of the nurse with a red mark across her face. Megan knew exactly what had happened, and she had said nothing. At first, she told herself that it was not her place. Then she told herself that security cameras would reveal the truth anyway. Then she told herself that she had patients to care for and could not risk creating more chaos. But beneath every excuse was the same ugly fact. She had been afraid. Megan had heard stories about Graham. Everyone had. She knew he had influence over staffing, promotions, and performance reviews. She knew he could make a person's work life miserable without ever saying anything that could be proven. But by the next morning, another thought had become impossible to ignore. Daniela had been afraid too, and Daniela had still done the right thing. Megan went to the compliance office and asked to provide a statement. At first, the investigator looked surprised. The official report from the previous day contained no mention of an assault. It only referred to a disagreement involving a donor and a staff member. But Megan spoke carefully and directly. She said she had witnessed Vivian strike Daniela. She said Daniela had not threatened Vivian or moved toward her. She said she saw Vivian pull Daniela's badge before the slap. Then Megan said the words that mattered most. She said that Graham had never asked her what she saw. The investigator wrote everything down. By early afternoon, the hallway that had been silent the day before was beginning to speak. Not loudly, not perfectly, but enough. The next witness came from a place no one expected. Mrs. Helen Ward had spent most of the day waiting for her daughter, who finally arrived after traffic from the interstate accident had eased. Helen had been tired, frightened, and overwhelmed by the hospital environment. But when she heard from a nurse that Daniela had been sent home after an incident, she immediately asked to speak with someone in charge. Helen did not know anything about Vivian Hollis. She did not know about the Hollis Foundation, the merger, or the executives meeting upstairs. She did not know Samuel Reed's title. She only knew what she had seen from her room. She told the investigator that Daniela had been kind to her when she felt alone. She described how the nurse had explained her condition, adjusted her blanket, and made sure she understood what was happening. Then she described the woman who entered the hallway, angry and loud. Helen said Vivian had accused Daniela before Daniela had even spoken. She said she remembered hearing Vivian claim that Daniela had followed her, but Helen knew that was impossible because Daniela had been on the floor long before Vivian arrived. She had seen Daniela checking on patients, speaking with nurses, and helping near the observation rooms. Helen's statement did more than confirm the assault. It destroyed the story Vivian had tried to create, because it established that Daniela had not been following anyone. She had been working. Meanwhile, the security department was reviewing the cameras. Graham had assumed the hallway footage would be unclear. He remembered that the third-floor corridor had been under renovation months earlier, and he believed the camera near the restricted access sign had been removed or turned at an angle that would not capture the confrontation. What he did not know was that the hospital had upgraded several cameras after a previous incident involving an unauthorized visitor. The system had been designed to store footage automatically on an external server, not on equipment controlled by the local administration. That meant no one inside St. Aldan could quietly erase it. The security supervisor, a man named Robert Kell, had worked at the hospital for 14 years. He was not easily impressed by wealthy visitors or executive pressure. His job had taught him that truth often looked different from the first story people told. When he reviewed the footage, he found exactly what everyone feared and hoped to see. Vivian entered the restricted corridor alone. Daniela was already there, assisting with patient care. Vivian approached Daniela first. Daniela did not chase her, threaten her, or block her way. She simply spoke to her from a respectful distance and gestured toward the public hallway. Then Vivian took Daniela's badge. Then Vivian slapped her. The camera did not capture every word clearly, but it captured enough. It captured the truth. Robert also pulled the access control logs. Vivian had not been authorized to enter the third-floor staff corridor. Daniela's badge had been scanned on that floor because Graham had ordered her transfer there. The timeline matched Daniela's complaint perfectly. The evidence was not emotional. It was not opinion. It was not influenced by money, fear, or reputation. It was time-stamped. And because it was time-stamped, it was almost impossible to deny. When the footage reached the compliance office, the tone of the investigation changed immediately. What had begun as a workplace complaint became a formal review of assault, retaliation, donor influence, and administrative misconduct. Vivian Hollis was contacted by the hospital's legal department and informed that the incident was under active investigation. At first, she reacted with disbelief. She insisted that Daniela had provoked her. She said she had felt threatened. She implied that the hospital was turning against her because a powerful outsider had become involved. But then she learned about the camera footage. For the first time, Vivian's certainty wavered. She had spent years believing that money protected her from consequences, not because she thought of herself as a villain, but because she had grown used to a world that rearranged itself around her. Restaurants found tables, offices returned calls. People apologized even when she was the one who had behaved badly. She had mistaken accommodation for respect. She had mistaken fear for loyalty. And now, for the first time in a very long time, she was discovering that neither could change a recording. Graham Mercer reacted differently. Vivian was angry. Graham was terrified. He knew the video alone could end his career. But the deeper investigation threatened to expose more than one bad decision. As compliance officers reviewed emails, staffing records, donor access notes, and executive communications, they began to see a pattern. Graham had not merely tried to protect Vivian after the assault. He had been protecting her for years. The record showed that Vivian and her family had received access to appointment slots outside normal scheduling procedures. On several occasions, staff had been pressured to move other patients, sometimes without clear medical reasons. There were emails where Graham described the Hollis family as essential to the hospital's future and encouraged managers to avoid upsetting them under any circumstances. He had never written the words that made the arrangement illegal. He was too careful for that. But the intent was everywhere, in the unusually fast responses to Vivian's complaints, in the special treatment notes hidden inside administrative emails, in the way staff members were warned to be flexible whenever the Hollis name appeared, in the way Daniela had been moved without documentation, and in the way Graham had tried to send her out through the back door before anyone could ask questions. The investigation revealed something else that made the board even more alarmed. The Hollis Foundation had not actually completed the donation it had promised for the pediatric expansion. The public announcement had created the impression that the money was secure, but much of the pledge was still tied to conditions, deadlines, and naming rights negotiations. Graham had been behaving as though St. Alden already owed Vivian everything. In reality, the hospital had been bending itself around money it had not even received. That fact changed the atmosphere inside the boardroom. For months, the trustees had feared that challenging Vivian would jeopardize the hospital's future. But now they had to consider a harder question. What kind of future did they have if they allowed people with money to control medical decisions? By the end of the second day, the board called an emergency meeting. It was not public, not at first. The hospital's lawyers advised caution. There were employment laws, privacy concerns, possible criminal charges, and contractual obligations to review. But everyone in the room understood that the situation had moved beyond internal discipline. Daniela was invited to attend with a representative from the Nursing Association. She did not want Samuel beside her at the table, not because she did not appreciate him, but because she wanted the board to see her clearly, not as someone's fiancé, not as the person connected to Horizon Medical Alliance, not as a symbol of embarrassment for the hospital. She wanted them to see her as what she had always been, a nurse who had done her job. The meeting took place in a conference room on the top floor, a space with glass walls overlooking the city. It was the kind of room where people discussed budgets, expansion plans, and public image. On the walls hung framed photographs of groundbreaking ceremonies and smiling donors holding oversized checks. Daniela noticed those photographs when she entered. For a moment, she wondered how many people in those pictures had ever considered what happened to the staff members who made their institutions function every day. The nurses who stayed late, the technicians who kept equipment running, the housekeeping staff who cleaned rooms after tragedy, the receptionists who absorbed anger from frightened families, the people whose names never appeared on plaques. Vivian sat near the opposite end of the table with her attorney. She looked composed, but her confidence was different now. The sharp certainty from the hallway was gone. She had read the investigation summary. She knew the footage existed. She knew the witnesses had spoken. She knew that the hospital no longer needed to choose between protecting its employees and protecting a donor, because the donor had become the very thing the hospital needed protection from. Graham sat several seats away. He looked smaller than Daniela remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The man who had once controlled the hallway with a few cold instructions now kept his hands folded in front of him, as though he could make himself less visible by becoming still. The board chair began by summarizing the findings. She spoke in careful, formal language. She described the documented assault. She described the improper suspension of Daniela without investigation. She described the failure to follow workplace violence procedures. She described the evidence that donor influence had affected staffing and patient access decisions. Then she spoke about institutional responsibility. That was the moment the room changed. Because until then, the case could have been treated as a conflict between Vivian and Daniela. But the board chair made it clear that it was not. The failure belonged to the system. Vivian had committed the assault. Graham had enabled the cover-up. But the hospital had created the conditions in which both believed they could act without consequences. The chair then invited Daniela to speak. Daniela stood slowly. She had prepared notes, but when she looked around the room, she realized she did not want to read them. She did not want her words to sound rehearsed. She wanted the people who had spent 2 days discussing liability and reputation to understand what the event had felt like from the inside. She explained that she had worked at St. Alden for 8 years because she believed in the hospital's mission. She had cared for patients who could not pay, patients who had no family, patients who arrived angry because fear had made them feel helpless. She had never expected every day to be easy. She understood that hospitals were stressful places, but she said there was a difference between stress and injustice. She said the slap hurt, but it was not the part she would remember most. What she would remember was looking around afterward and seeing people who knew the truth choose silence because they believed the truth would not protect them. She said that no employee should have to wonder whether their safety depends on the social status of the person hurting them. She said that no patient should have to wait longer because someone wealthy believes their comfort matters more than another person's survival. And she said that no hospital should call itself a place of healing while allowing fear to become part of its culture. Daniela did not ask for revenge. She asked for change. She asked for a policy that protected employees from violence, regardless of who caused it. She asked for a clear process that prevented donors, executives, or board members from interfering with clinical triage. She asked for a confidential reporting system so witnesses could speak without fearing retaliation. And she asked for training that would teach staff what to do when they saw harm happening in front of them. When she finished, no one applauded. It was not that kind of room. But the silence this time was different. It was not fear. It was shame. Vivian's attorney spoke next. He attempted to frame the assault as an isolated lapse in judgment. He emphasized Vivian's years of charitable work, her contributions to the city, and the stress of the moment. He suggested that she had become overwhelmed after being told her procedure was delayed. But the argument sounded weak against the evidence. Stress did not explain entering a restricted corridor. Stress did not explain taking Daniela's badge. Stress did not explain inventing a false story. And stress certainly did not explain why Vivian expected the hospital to punish the woman she had struck. When Vivian finally spoke, she did not offer a full apology. Not yet. She said she regretted that the situation had escalated. She said she never intended for Daniela to be harmed. She said she had felt ignored and disrespected. But even in that moment, she still spoke as though the greatest injury had happened to her. Daniela watched quietly. She understood something Vivian did not. An apology that begins with self-pity is not an apology. It is another attempt to avoid accountability. The board adjourned for private deliberation. The decision took several hours. During that time, Samuel remained outside the process. Horizon's legal team had advised him not to participate in any decision involving Daniela directly, and he respected that boundary. But he sat with her in a quiet waiting area near the executive offices, not speaking much, not trying to solve anything, simply making sure she did not have to face the day alone. At one point, Daniela asked him whether he thought the board would actually do the right thing. Samuel did not answer with certainty. He had worked in healthcare long enough to know that institutions often changed slowly, even when the truth was obvious. He knew that board members worried about lawsuits, public image, donor relationships, and financial stability. He knew that people sometimes chose the least painful option instead of the right one. But he told her something else. Whatever the board decided, the truth had already changed the hospital. The hallway was no longer silent. The witnesses had spoken. The footage existed. The emails existed. And once people had seen how fear had shaped their choices, they could not pretend they had not seen it. Late that afternoon, the board called everyone back into the conference room. The chair read the decisions one by one. Vivian Hollis was immediately banned from all non-emergency access to St. Alden Regional Hospital. She would no longer be permitted to visit the hospital as a donor, guest, or member of any advisory group. Her foundation's naming rights agreement for the pediatric expansion was terminated. The board also voted to return all unused funds tied to the naming arrangement rather than allow the hospital's future to remain connected to her influence. For Vivian, it was a blow unlike anything she had experienced. Her name had always opened doors. Now it was being removed from one. The board also confirmed that the hospital would cooperate fully with law enforcement regarding the assault. The security footage and witness statements were turned over to the district attorney's office. Vivian's wealth could hire attorneys. It could delay some things. It could soften some public embarrassment. But it could not make the video disappear. Graham Mercer was suspended immediately pending termination proceedings. The board cited his failure to protect an employee, his improper handling of the incident, his retaliation against Daniela, and his repeated use of donor influence to interfere with hospital operations. A separate audit would review every case in which special treatment had been given to high-profile donors or board-connected individuals. For Graham, the punishment was more painful than losing a title. He had built his career around being indispensable. He had convinced himself that he was protecting the hospital by keeping powerful people happy. He had told himself that compromises were necessary, that everyone benefited from the money, that someone had to manage difficult personalities. But now the truth was impossible to avoid. He had not protected the hospital. He had weakened it. He had taught staff that policy could be bought. He had taught donors that influence came before ethics. And he had helped create the exact environment that allowed Vivian Hollis to believe she could strike a nurse and walk away untouched. Daniela was formally reinstated with full back pay for the time she had been placed on leave. The board issued a written apology, acknowledging that the hospital had failed to protect her. It also committed to establishing a new Employee Safety and Witness Protection Council, led jointly by frontline staff and independent compliance officers. Daniela was asked to help design the program. At first, she hesitated. She did not want a title given to her as a gesture. She did not want to become a symbol used in a press release and forgotten once the headlines faded. She wanted assurance that the council would have real authority, real reporting channels, and real protection for employees who spoke up. The board agreed. Lillian Park would serve beside her. Dr. Megan Blake volunteered to help create mandatory training for physicians and staff on bystander intervention, workplace violence, and ethical escalation. The program would teach people how to document incidents, how to intervene safely, and how to report retaliation without losing their jobs. For Megan, it was not enough to say she was sorry. She wanted to make sure the next person in her position would know what courage looked like before it was too late. Helen Ward received a letter from the board thanking her for her statement. She laughed when her daughter read it aloud, saying that she had only said what anyone should say when they see someone being treated badly. But that was exactly why her statement mattered. Helen had no title, no influence, no professional obligation. She had simply chosen not to look away. The criminal case against Vivian moved more slowly than the hospital investigation. Legal processes often did. Months passed. News outlets reported on the suspension of Graham Mercer and the termination of the Hollis naming agreement. Public reaction was divided at first. Some people praised the hospital for acting. Others argued that Vivian's years of charity should not be erased by one terrible moment. But the security footage changed the conversation. Once people saw what had happened, it became difficult to describe it as a misunderstanding. Vivian eventually accepted a plea agreement on a misdemeanor assault charge. She was ordered to complete community service at a nonprofit medical clinic, attend a behavioral accountability program, and remain away from Daniela. The court also required her to make a financial contribution to an independent employee safety fund, though Daniela made it clear that she did not want the money treated as forgiveness. No amount could undo what happened, but it could help protect someone else. Vivian's community service was not glamorous. The nonprofit clinic served people who had no insurance, people who worked multiple jobs, people who delayed care because they could not afford it, and people who had spent years being treated as invisible by systems that were supposed to help them. For the first time in her life, Vivian had to stand in a place where no one cared about her family name. She was not introduced as a donor. She was not given special access. She was asked to organize supplies, prepare waiting areas, help with basic administrative tasks, and listen when patients needed directions. At first, she resented it. She moved through the clinic with the stiff posture of someone who believed she had been unfairly reduced. But week after week, she saw people waiting patiently for care they could not afford. She saw exhausted mothers trying to keep children calm. She saw elderly patients apologizing for asking too many questions. She saw nurses working through lunch because there were too many people to help. And slowly, painfully, she began to understand something she had never understood before. Being treated with dignity was not a privilege. It was the minimum every person deserved. Whether Vivian truly changed was something no one could know immediately. Real change was not proven by one apology, one court order, or one act of public humility. It was proven over time, through choices made when no cameras were watching and no consequences were guaranteed. But one thing was certain: she would never again walk into St. Alden Regional believing the building belonged to her. As for Graham Mercer, the investigation continued long after he left the hospital. The audit uncovered several other cases in which employees had been pressured to accommodate donors in ways that compromised policy. Some incidents were small, others were more serious. In every case, the pattern was the same. Graham had treated the hospital's ethical boundaries as flexible whenever money was involved. He lost his position, his influence, and the trust he had spent years pretending to earn. No one sent him out through a back exit. No one needed to. His choices had already made every door close. Months later, St. Alden Regional Hospital began to change in visible ways. New signs appeared near staff entrances and waiting areas, clearly stating that violence against healthcare workers would not be tolerated, regardless of a visitor's status, connections, or financial contributions. A confidential reporting line was created. Security procedures were strengthened. Donor relations were separated from clinical decision-making. No executive could move a staff member or interfere with triage without written documentation and independent review. The changes did not erase the past, but they made it harder for the past to repeat itself. Daniela returned to work gradually. Her first day back on the 3rd floor was harder than she expected. She had told herself that she was ready, but when she stepped into the same corridor where Vivian had slapped her, her body remembered before her mind did. The polished floor, the restricted access sign, the sound of carts rolling in the distance, everything brought the moment back. For a few seconds, she stood still. Then Lillian appeared beside her. She did not say anything dramatic. She simply stood there, close enough to remind Daniela that she was no longer alone. Soon after, Megan joined them. She looked nervous but determined. She had spent the past few weeks helping develop the first staff workshop on intervention and reporting. She told Daniela that the session had filled faster than expected. Nurses, doctors, technicians, and support staff had all signed up. People wanted to learn. People wanted to do better. Daniela looked down the hallway. The same place that had once witnessed silence was now becoming part of a different story. Not a perfect story. Not one where everyone suddenly became brave, but one where fear was no longer allowed to be the final answer. Over time, Daniela became known for more than what had happened to her. She became one of the strongest voices in the new Employee Safety Council. She listened to staff members who had been afraid to report harassment. She helped younger nurses understand that professionalism did not mean accepting abuse. She worked with administrators to make sure policies were not just words on paper. And every time someone told her they were afraid to speak up, she remembered the hallway. She remembered the badge being pulled from her uniform. She remembered the sting of Vivian's hand. But more than anything, she remembered the silence. Because silence had been the true enemy. Not only Vivian's arrogance, not only Graham's corruption, not even the hospital's fear of losing money. The real danger had been the moment when decent people saw wrong happening and convinced themselves that it was safer not to get involved. Daniela understood that courage did not always look dramatic. It did not always arrive with power, influence, or a perfect speech. Sometimes it looked like an older patient giving an honest statement. Sometimes it looked like a doctor admitting that she had been afraid. Sometimes it looked like a nurse forwarding an email she had kept hidden for months. And sometimes it looked like a person refusing to let humiliation turn them into silence. One afternoon, nearly a year after the incident, Daniela stood near the emergency department entrance as another busy shift began. The hospital was crowded again. Ambulances arrived. Families waited. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. The work had not become easier. Hospitals were still complicated places. People were still tired. Mistakes still happened. But something fundamental had changed. A young nurse approached Daniela after dealing with an angry visitor who had shouted at her near the waiting room. The nurse looked shaken. In the past, she might have apologized for causing trouble. She might have tried to handle it alone. Instead, she reported it. Security responded. A supervisor documented the incident. Other staff members stood beside her. It was a small moment. Most people would never hear about it. But Daniela watched the young nurse walk away, knowing she had been protected. And she felt something settle inside her. That was what justice looked like after the headlines faded. Not only punishment, not only public shame, but a world made safer because someone refused to accept what used to be normal. The day Vivian Hollis slapped Daniela Cruz, she believed she was punishing a nurse for forgetting her place. What she did not understand was that Daniela had never forgotten her place. Daniela's place was beside patients who needed care, beside co-workers who needed protection, beside the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. And in the end, the woman who thought the hospital belonged to her learned the lesson she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Money can buy attention. It can buy access. It can even buy silence for a while. But it cannot buy the right to take another person's dignity. And when enough people finally choose to speak, even the most powerful lie begins to fall apart. If you believe no one should have to stand alone against injustice, share your thoughts in the comments. And remember this: sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not look away.